Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, April 28th, last Monday in April, and this is a study session of the Minnetonka City Council. We'll go around and introduce ourselves, starting with Miranda.
Yeah. Brenda Dahman, Assistant City Manager.
Mike Funk, City Manager.
Kizzy Coakley, Ward 4, City Council Member.
Rebecca Shack, Ward 2.
Brad Worsom, Mayor.
Paula Romali, Ward 3. Patsy Foster Bolton, Ward 1.
Deb Calvert, City Council at Large, Seat A.
Paige Sullivan, Mold Architects and Engineers.
John McNamara, Old Architects and Engineers.
Kevin Fox, Fire Chief.
Derek Metzger, Deputy Chief, Minnetonka Fire.
Julie Wishnak, Community Development Director.
Darren Nelson, Finance Director.
Scott Borton, Police Chief. Kelly O'Day, Recreation Director.
Aaron Morris, Assistant Fire Chief.
Sarissa Falk, Senior Management Coordinator.
Eric Nelson, City Attorney.
Will Manchester, Public Works Director.
And Kevin Ringhofer, resident.
So good evening, everyone.
And there's one other person.
Oh, excuse me, Kimberly Wilburn. There she is. She's got her hand raised. Ma'am.
Kimberly Wilburn, City Council at Large.
Thank you, council member. Good to see you. You're kind of small on the screen, but you're there. So let's see, we'll call this meeting to order, and we've done the introduction. So business items, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Good evening, Council. As you notice, you'll see all of our directors and other staff here tonight. Not because they're not only interested in the fire conversation, but also here to hear the survey results. So we're planning on, at least time-wise, hoping that our fire discussion tonight goes for about an hour and a half, which then leaves us an hour for the remainder of the meeting for Peter Leatherman to go through the community survey and then also the business survey. So that's kind of our sequence of here this evening. But again, our directors and other staff are, again, interested in the fire conversation, but also here to hear the results of the community survey. So that's why you see a lot of our staff here this evening. So with that, I really want to get us kicked over to Chief Fox and Assistant Chief Metzger. As you saw in your packet, and I think as I've chatted with all of you today on the phone tonight, is informational. It's mainly an informational evening here tonight. We'll turn it over again to our friends in the police department and Wold Architects to really go through, first off, the station analysis, and that was contained in your staff report, so you have some good information about the work that's been done on that front. And then we'll talk about service level objectives, and those do go hand in hand. And there's a nexus between those two. And as I mentioned, tonight is really just a high-level first blush at this information. And as I've communicated with Darren Nelson, our Finance Director, Chief Fox, and the Assistant Chief Metzger, tonight's again the first night of this. Because as we look at the larger capital improvement needs of the city, certainly we talked about the fire stations here this evening. Rewind the clock about this time last year, Mr. O'Day was here with the consultants on our rec facilities. So you had a report outlining the needs for the Williston, the Marsh, the Community Center, and Glen Lake. And so Kelly will be back next study session in May to re-highlight that information. So that way you'll have fire information tonight. In May, you'll also then receive a refresh on the community rec facilities. And then that's going to propel us into, again, as I referenced, Mr. Nelson and I working on that financial management plan, because at some point you're going to be asking, and you should be asking, what does this all mean? How do we fund it? When do we fund it? When can this all happen? And that's what we'll start to really map out in the May study session and gearing up for that. So tonight, again, more informational, a lot for you to consider as we go through the presentation. So with that, Mayor and Council, I'd like to really just kick it over to Chief Fox and have them introduce, or reintroduce, they've already introduced themselves, again, our friends over at Wold Architects. So with that, Chief Fox.
Thanks, Mike. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this evening we have two different presentations for you, and we'll get into the fire station needs assessment here shortly. Just a reminder, so in 2024, we engaged with Wold Architects and Engineering to take a look at our fire stations, to really take a high-level look at what can we do with these facilities to accommodate kind of the plans we've set forth in our public safety master plan. So they worked on that all of 2024, and wrapped it up at the end of the year, and so they're here tonight for that. Before I turn it over to John McNamara and Paige Sullivan with Wold, I'm going to have my Deputy Chief, Derek Metzger, just kind of give an overview of the fire stations, because it's really easy for us to talk about the fire station and say Station 2, Station 3, but that doesn't mean as much to somebody who's not as familiar with it. So he's going to go over kind of what stations are what, where they're located, and what are some of the key areas that they serve. So as we go through the needs assessment, you'll have a better frame of reference as to what particular station we're talking about. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Derek, and he'll get started.
All right, thanks, Chief Fox. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Derek Metzger, Deputy Fire Chief again. So tonight we'll look at the satellite fire stations that we have. So we'll start with, I guess it's not controlled here.
There we go.
Oh, perfect. So we'll start with Fire Station 2. It's at 1815 Hopkins Crossroads. So Station 2 is located in Ward 2, and it's close in proximity to the Ridgedale area. It's also close to a lot of the Hopkins School District, including Hopkins High School, North Junior High, and Tanglin Elementary. It's right on the northeast side of town there. So it was constructed in 1976. There was some additions over the years or renovations. In the early 2000s, there was a classroom added to the south side of the building, along with a kitchen and day room remodel in 2018. So this is currently a double deep pull-through bay, as well as a callback fire station. So when we call back our paid-on-call firefighters, they'll respond to the station, and their apparatus is staffed there. As part of our public safety master plan and the Citygate study, it identified us trying to attempt staffing this as much as possible. It does not accommodate 24-hour staffing currently, but during 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. we'll rotate a truck there when our staffing permits to cover that area. All right, and then this does not have exhaust capture, which is something that we've installed in some of the fire stations that capture the diesel exhaust coming from the trucks. They're the big tubes, if you ever see those hanging down from the ceilings. And then the gear lockers are also stored in the apparatus bay. So a couple photos of what that looks like. So on the left side here, you'll see the apparatus bay, and then the renovated day room, and then the classroom addition. Moving on to Fire Station 3. So Fire Station 3 is located in Ward 1. It's on our southeast end of the city. It's close to the Opus area, as you can see, located on Roland Road there. It's also close in proximity to the future light rail station that will be coming, as well as Glen Lake Elementary. There's several parks in that area of the city as well that it services, along with Shady Oak Beach, and then the United Health Group campus in that Opus area. It was constructed in 1987. Renovations in 2019 as part of the plans to build the central fire station. We needed to move out of our Station 1 and occupy a few other stations while that construction was occurring. So Station 3 was identified as one of those stations, so there were some dorm rooms added so that we could occupy it 24 hours a day. And currently there's 2 to 3 firefighter staff there 24/7. It is a double deep apparatus bay, which means you could stack 2 fire trucks front to back, but it is not a pull-through bay, so we have to back into that. If you're familiar with that area, it's sort of built into that hill right there. And again, the gear lockers are located on the apparatus bay. Some photographs of that station. So on the left side, you see the apparatus bay. There's a meeting room in the lower area, which has been converted from a training room since it's been occupied 24 hours a day, along with the watch room and day room kitchen on the upstairs, which is also where the dorm rooms are located. You'll notice these next couple fire stations look very similar in design to Fire Station 3. So moving on to Fire Station 4. It's located in Ward 4. It's close in proximity to Minnetonka High School, several elementary schools in that area of the city, Purgatory Park, and the 7 High Shopping Center. It was constructed in '86. Again, double deep bays, and this one does have drive-through bays, so we're able to pull our apparatus into that station without having to back them up. It does not have exhaust capture, and the gear lockers are located on the apparatus bay. And the reason why I note that is that as we do this ongoing analysis, we're looking at industry best standards and especially reviewing upcoming OSHA standards as best practices as far as where we store our equipment. And more, and as you see is featured at Station 1, is we have a separate room for turnout gear with a separate HVAC system that will pull any off-gassing chemicals from the gear and extract that from the building. So you can see again on the left side is the apparatus bay, watch room, the day room, and classroom. So moving on to Station 5. This is located on our northwest area of the city on Wayzata Boulevard, just off of Carlson Parkway. Located in Ward 3, it's close to the Cargill campus, also close in proximity to the Ridgedale area, close to the Grays Bay Marina, and then the Carlson Towers. It was constructed in '91, and this was also part of that renovations when we were planning on moving out of Station 1 during construction, so that we could staff that 24 hours a day as well. This station does not have pull-through bays. It is used as a callback response station, but this is the station we plan on staffing 24 hours a day in September as part of the additional staffing coming this year. And then there are 4 dorm rooms for overnight staffing. This does have exhaust capture from the exhaust from our trucks, and the gear lockers are also on the apparatus bay. One thing I'll note for both the Station 3 and 5 update as far as the additions for the dorm rooms added in 2019 is that they're more of a temporary measure designed to move out of our Station 1 and then move back in. So although that it is construction, there's drywall and framing up, some of the HVAC for a long-term solution wouldn't necessarily have gone into that as well. And I'll look at some of the photographs there. So talking about the facility assessment of each of these. So this comes from, I apologize for the small font, it may be difficult to read, but we'll provide this. So this comes from our Citygate study. And on the left-hand side, you'll see what the assessment grading scale is. It goes from excellent, good, fair, and poor. And on the right side, you'll see what the Citygate study analyzed each one of these fire stations to be. So you can see Fire Station 1, it was a brand new facility when this was completed. It was rated as excellent. Fire Station 2 was rated as fair. Fire Station 3, poor. Fire Station 4, fair. Fire Station 5, in good condition. So then they graded this and put into the study as far as a priority list. They used that assessment as part of their priority list, along with several other factors to determine in what order we should replace these stations or address these stations. So you can see listed out on the right the capital improvement or replacement priority. Going from top to bottom, you can see Station 2 was listed as the #1 priority, with Station 3, 4, and 5 following that. It's 2, 3, and 4. With that, does anybody have any questions?
Council, questions? Looking at our satellite stations, any thoughts come to mind?
All right. Okay, so with that then, I will turn it over to John. If he can exit out, we'll get their presentation pulled up.
You know, as we look, I mean, the question that I have is, clearly, you know, all these stations were built at a different time when the view of what was necessary for adequate fire stations was dramatically different. I mean, exhaust capture, isolation of turnout gear, you know, all those things didn't really exist when these stations were built. And frankly, none of the sites are particularly large, you know, so you know, when you think about, okay, pull-through stations and things like that, well, we'd have to acquire property, and that's not necessarily impossible. But yeah, it's just, you know, why do we have, you know, we have 4 satellite stations. They look nice, but it's clear that they're by and large, half of them are, you know, got poor ratings, and the remainder have meaningful shortcomings. So it's an important issue, it's a challenging issue, and not with easy solutions.
Yeah, very similar to our original Station 1, you know, when these stations were built. It was built at a time when the fire department was a volunteer, paid-on-call fire department. I think there was 4 administrative full-time staff that worked out of Station 1. Always rest of the fire department was all volunteer
Right.
or paid on call. And so all of the facilities were designed around that model at the time, and it worked very well for many years. But now as the fire service is evolving and our fire department is changing, that, you know, the needs we have out of these stations are changing along with it
Yeah.
too, so. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to
Great.
John. Thank you.
And any other comments? or
Well, I mean, my
counsel?
only most of my comments really have to do with things that aren't really, you know, in the purview of fire per se, because it has to do with land acquisition, funding mechanisms, and, you know.
Yeah.
You know, but one of my questions earlier had been, what's the priority? And that gave us the priority
Right.
of, you know, because we can't do them all at the same time for a variety of reasons. So that was helpful.
Great. Anything else? I don't want to cut anybody off. Paula?
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. I spoke with Mike about this morning, and I was just wondering, are there other things that can be done besides? I mean, what are we looking at? Are there, 24-hour staffing, is that a must-do? Are there other ways that, we can look at this, maybe looking at peak time staffing for satellites in the meantime, kind of just hoping that, we can look at, just right now, it just seems like it's, all of these stations have to be upgraded, and, probably they eventually can, but, we really just spent $30 million on Station 1 and are still barely into a 30-year bond for that. So this is gonna be a really tough thing to try to finance when we have other needs as well. So I just hope that, we can look at some other potential options or a way to get to where we need, kind of on an interim basis, while we figure out funding to kind of pay for this, and as well as, the many other things that we, kind of also are doing as a city. And I don't know that I have the answers. I just hope that we can, kind of look around at, think about some other ways to approach this. So, because obviously we can't replace all of these at once. It may not even be in 5 years. It may be looking at a 10, 20-year, I don't know, outlook. And so, what can we do in the meantime, I guess?
And then I do always do such a good job of missing the person on the screen. So Kimberly, if you have anything, feel free. I'm not calling on you. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't ignore you.
I do have a question, but I think you can wait until after
Okay.
the Wold presentation.
All right. Then we'll turn it back to you. Thanks. Thanks, council members.
Mayor and council, again, thanks for having us tonight. It's really great to kind of walk through what we've been working on over the last year. And certainly there's a lot of information here to digest as it relates to not only the staffing study, but as Kevin brought us in to kind of think through what does that look like at each of these stations, whether that's can they be modified was one of our charges to look at, and so you'll see some solutions related to that. Or in that instance where it isn't really practical or it doesn't seem like it's going to meet the needs of the city long term, we also have some dialogue in here related to some of those replacement dialogue. So I'm not going to go through some of the front end stuff. Derek did a great job of kind of talking through where the stations are located at, when they were built, and some of those types of things. And so I think we'll start just with a big overview of each of the stations, what we discovered during the programming side of things in our walkthroughs, and what some of the challenges might be as we look at each of these locations. And so this is an aerial view of Station 2 on the north side. You can see the site, as Mayor, you had mentioned, or somebody had mentioned, that they're all fairly small sites. And much of what we do with fire stations today is different than what we did, even 10 years ago, not let alone 20 years ago. And so it's no big surprise that some of these stations don't have some of the best practices that we designed into Station 1. So you can see that the building kind of sits nicely at the corner there. There are a couple of parking areas on site for the crews when they show up here. And so what we really started to look at was what does the building look like? It has had some modifications to add a training space, some locker space, and a better day room in there, but as was mentioned, there are no sleeping rooms at the station, and so our biggest challenge here was, with such an oddly configured building, what could we do in order to accomplish some level of on-site sleeping space in the building? And so we went through a programming exercise, and again, this detailed program is also in the study report that was in your packet. But just generally speaking, what we did was we looked at what the existing space utilization was. So that station, just for conversation purposes, about 5,400 square feet in size, so it's a fairly small station. As was mentioned, it does have 2 apparatus bays in there right now. It is a drive-through bay, but the apparatus bays are smaller than what we would design today. Apparatus has gotten bigger over the years. Some of the bigger deficiencies in here are really related to having proper decontamination space in here. Having any sort of training or fitness space at this facility just doesn't exist. And so we really kind of went through, and there are 2 columns in here. One is, okay, what if we do have to renovate this and add on to it because it's just not practical to rebuild it right now? And then we looked at a hypothetical program as to what should we be looking at for deployment at this location. And so the square footages for that kind of vary between roughly about 6,500 square feet to get some sleeping space in there and a few other features in there. Or if you were to look at doing a replacement at this location, we'd need roughly about 13,400 square feet in order to do that. And so what then we decided that we needed to do was kind of look at how would we go about doing both an addition renovation or new construction.
Yeah, so if you'll notice on the screen here, we've got some additions to this building and then some renovations. So as Derek kind of went through, the apparatus bay does split the building in 2. So we've got kind of the plan would be to have some maintenance area, a gear wash and gear storage off of the southern end there, and then all of our living space up to the north. So living space would be an addition. We can fit about 3 dorm rooms and a toilet shower room off to the north here, and then also a shift office. And then the station already does have a really nice kitchen dining day room area, so there would be just some minor modifications there. Unfortunately, with that apparatus bay right in the middle, it really is kind of the worst case scenario for decontamination and for separating of the hazards. Folks would have to go from the dorm room side over to the locker room side and vice versa. So it's really kind of crossing paths quite a bit. Looking at the site, as we've talked about, it is an L-shaped site. So and the existing building is kind of right in the center there. So it does make any modifications pretty difficult. Expansion to the north is what we found to be able to maintain the drive-through apparatus bays. We are looking at doing an expansion to the north there. If you were to do additions, you then would still have access to your parking areas on either side. We did also look at the possibility of tearing down and starting fresh at this location. So you are again still able to keep parking on both sides there for the firefighters. We are still able to get the drive-through apparatus bay. And then we're able to get kind of, our green zone of the clean living spaces, yellow zone, which is the warm decontamination and support spaces, and then the red zone, which is the apparatus space.
Mm-hmm.
So just some general comments about Station 2. So this station, the additions here, we are only able to get 3 dorm rooms at this location. So it does not meet the 5 that are expected or targeted for the long-term build-out. The remodel also does not meet the decontamination standards that we have set at the Station 1 and that are looking to be set in the future. So we just don't have the space to accommodate all of that. It does not accommodate the gear storage. Gear would have to remain on that apparatus bay floor, unfortunately. And then, as we've kind of talked about, since it does not meet the 5 bunk rooms, that would be the long-term build-out. This would really just be a 10-year Band-Aid, so it would not really be suitable for longer than that. Then we also did want to comment too that this station and how we've laid it out does not include any fitness area or training gathering space. And it's the most disjointed since we have that apparatus bay right in the middle.
So the next station to talk about is Station 3. And I think one of the things to note on this one that was talked about earlier was this one is built into a hillside, so it does not have the capability of having a drive-through facility there, and any sort of expansion on the site is going to be somewhat impractical given the hill and the location. There's an odd existing right-of-way that would probably have to be cleaned up if we were going to continue to expand on the site. And through our conversations with the fire department, we just really said this is, if we're looking at this particular station, this would be a good candidate for a replacement station. The reinvestment at this site is probably not worth doing. And so as you look at kind of the layout of it, I think what with this station, this was remodeled as part of the 2019 project, so there are some sleeping rooms in there. But as mentioned, this was a down and dirty project in order to get people out of the current station and into this station while we did construction here. So a lot of the improvements there were done as inexpensively as possible, because we really just, this was being considered as a temporary solution there. So if this station is going to continue to be kept in operation even on a temporary basis, there are probably some things that you may want to continue to do to maintain this facility. And so programmatically, we didn't put together a program for additions and renovations just because of that discussion we had. But really what we were looking at was, for this particular building, looking at a station that would be a little under 15,000 square feet, which is pretty typical for a station at this size, and looking at the types of things that we need to put in there for sleeping rooms, day room space, decon space, locker space, and a little bit of training space in here. And so this was one of the stations that we had talked about, that if this one was going to get rebuilt, this would be a prime candidate also for some additional training space to kind of supplement what is happening here at Station 1. And so if this station is going to get rebuilt, having enough site space for that type of work and training stuff would be important to consider as the city moves forward with that. So with this station, we know that it's really just not suitable for rebuilding. The remodeling that was done there, as I said, was similar to what was done previously. And again, the idea that if we were looking for an alternate site, the current sites are pretty small, so having a larger site to be able to handle some of the future stuff would be important. As we look at Station 4, again, as was noted, this is a little bit bigger site. It's a triangular shaped site that does allow for a drive-through apparatus bay, which is kind of the ideal way we'd like to see this. But there are some similar limitations as far as the building itself. But with this particular site, you could do an addition on it. So what we did look at was, what could we do to the station as far as renovations and additions. This is one of the stations that was not renovated to have sleeping rooms in it as part of the 2019 project. So in addition to making some of the other modifications, we would likely have to do some additional work with this building. So programmatically for this building, we did put a program together that looked at what it would look like to do an addition renovation. And so the existing station is roughly about 8,200 square feet. If we were to do additions and renovations, we would get to roughly about 11,000 square feet to it. And if we were looking at replacing the station, we'd be a little under 13,500 square feet in order to accommodate the needs for fire operations.
So layout for this, we would look at bringing the living space down to the main level in what is currently a training room space. So we would put a shift office down there, kitchen and dining room space, and the day room space at this level, with also a modification to existing toilet rooms to get an accessible toilet room down here. And then on the upper level, we would look at doing our 5 dorm rooms up there, along with some locker or some toilet shower rooms as well. We would then also, in this option, we would look at doing an addition to accommodate your turnout gear, some of that decontamination space, the fitness space, and the SCBA and tool room. We also then did look at a second option, really much the same as the first, with the living support space on the lower level and the actual dorm room and toilet showers on the upper level. But then this would bring a renovation to an existing apparatus bay where you could have your toilet or your turnout gear room. So getting that turnout gear off the apparatus bay floor. You could have your decon space, fitness space, and then other support spaces for the apparatus bay. And then you would do a separate addition that would just be an apparatus bay addition. So looking at the site, this is how the addition kind of lays out. So again, it's a tight site, but this would be fairly easy to add an apparatus bay there to the southeast side and maintain that drive-through bay. Really, the modifications to this building would need to modernize the mechanical systems. John kind of mentioned that there hasn't been work done here, so we would need to update the mechanical systems and the exterior envelope.
And so lastly, Station 5, and again, you're probably hearing some of the similar things with each of these. The big difference with Station 5 is due to its proximity to the freeway and the off-ramp there. It's a little bit tighter site, so there is not a drive-through capability at this location. And that particular location makes it a little bit challenging getting in and out of that site. There are some water issues in and around the building just due to the grading and stuff like that in this area. But again, it is feasible to add on to this, similar to the conversation that we were talking about for Station 4. This station does have those added sleeping rooms on the upstairs that were done in 2019. So there are some existing sleeping rooms here. There are 4 of them up there. But similar to Station 4, some of the other amenities don't exist in the station today. And so we did the program and space needs for Station 5 are identical to what we had talked about at Station 4. Just for brevity, I'm not going to go through that all that much, but the solutions for the station, again, are going to be pretty similar to what we talked about for Station 4.
Again, I won't get into the small details because it's really just the same with, you know, living support on the lower level, dorm rooms on the upper level, and then option 1 would be an expansion of your apparatus support space, and option 2 would be renovation to an existing apparatus bay for the apparatus support, and then a new addition of an apparatus bay. The site, again, very, very tight at this location. We are not able to get the drive-through, as John said, but we are still able to, you know, at least fit another apparatus bay on here. It's going to be very difficult for the vehicles to navigate the site because it's going to be even tighter, and circulation is going to just get more difficult. And then again, at this location, we would need to look at modernizing the mechanical systems and works on some exterior envelope issues.
Mm-hmm. And so part of the discussion that we had with the fire department was also to work through some cost ranges for conversation and budgeting purposes. And so we started to look at each of the stations individually as to what additions and renovations would cost for each of those, utilizing cost per square foot numbers that are in alignment with what we're seeing for similar size facilities out there for fire departments. And so looking at Station 2, if we were to look at doing that addition on the north side that we had shown you, that's roughly about 1,800 square feet. We're projecting a construction cost for that anywhere from about $1.4 million to about $1.6 million. And then we would still anticipate doing some interior modifications to the building too to try to pick up some of those ancillary projects on the inside. So we have roughly about $1.5 million to $1.8 million for some renovation work in there, giving us a total project cost of roughly about $2.1 million to $2.5 million. And that's total project cost, so that includes fees, testing contingencies, planning contingencies, because we're really early in the process right now. So the idea is to give the council a range to understand what a project like this would cost. Currently in the market, new construction for fire stations is running between $450 to $500 a square foot. And so if we apply those programmatic numbers that we had in there at 13,350 square feet, we would be looking at a construction cost between $6 million and $6.7 million, or a total project cost between about $8.1 and $9 million to replace Station 2. The one thing to note, these are budgetary numbers based on current calendar year, so as we know, it's a bit volatile out there right now. I will say the construction market's a little flat right now, but it's likely to continue to increase over time. So the industry standard is anywhere from 4 to 5% annually for construction inflation. And so as you kind of talk about where these projects land, we would need to consider those inflationary numbers to get out to the year that each of these would be done. As you look at Station 3, as discussed, we aren't anticipating additions and renovations here. So looking at a station that's roughly about 14,800 square feet, you'd be looking at a total project cost of around $8.9 million all the way up to $10 million for that replacement. And then looking at Station 4 and 5, because they are so similar as far as their size goes and the types of additions and renovations, we just lump both of those together. So for Station 4 and 5, we'd be looking at additions and renovation costs of around $4 million to $4.6 million, and then new construction for a station that, or for option 2. So we had those two options there. One of them had stuff inside, one of them just had an apparatus bay, would be between about $4.2 million to right around $5 million. And then for new construction, we would be looking at a station around 13,400 square feet. So again, roughly about $8.1 to $9 million for that. And so because we always anticipate people ask those questions, we did put a slide in here that kind of totals it all up. And so if we look at the totals rounded to about the nearest $500,000, if we were to look at doing additions and renovation, and this line item includes new construction for Station 3, you'd be a total for all of the stations between 19 and 22.5 million. And if they were all to be new construction, it'd be between $33.5 to $37 million for all of the stations. So that is our presentation today as to the study. Like I said, there's a lot more detail in the actual report, but certainly we would entertain any questions the council might have.
Great, thank you. Council questions? Rebecca?
Thanks, Brad. If I'm remembering correctly of when we received the original study, there was some conversation about kind of location. Do we have, is there opportunity for centralizing particular, was that on the north end maybe in the Ridgedale area? And consolidating, I mean, is that not an option? Or is that an option? And is that something we're thinking about?
So the study showed that overall our stations are actually in the most optimal locations as far as response goes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our service level objectives. But we did kind of on our end contemplate the concept of consolidating stations 2 and 5 on the north into a more central, into one station in a central location. And as we move through these projects, that is still an option we could look at. What this didn't show too is, especially with Station 3, and if we consolidated, is any type of land acquisition. And to consolidate on the north end of the city, we'd want to move more towards the center, towards the Ridgedale area, and what might be available up there is yet to be seen. So there is, but we have explored that and would consider that an option moving forward too if we needed to.
Kimberly, I know you had a question. Is this a good time, or do you want to save it yet?
No, this is a good time. So for Station 2, I have two questions, and I'll do them together. So for Station 2, was it determined at full staffing that you would need both of those parking lots? Or would it be possible to expand into part of one of the parking lots? And my other question is, I guess at Station 3 was the station that was decided that it wasn't, the location wasn't really suitable. Did you consider putting in a 2-story building on that site at all, or will the site just not work for the needs?
Yes, thank you. So to answer your first question in regards to Station 2, we do not need both those parking lots. So what you saw tonight was just an example of what we could do. There's potentially more options as to how a station might lay out on that. So we could potentially incorporate one of those parking areas into a new building. The house on the north side of the station does pose some challenges. I don't know how much the neighbor would appreciate if we move a fire station, 15 feet next to their house or not, but we do have the property there and have some options. So yes, we could do something potentially with the parking areas. In regards to Station 3, and John can jump in too, but the site in general, because of the sloping and the hill, that station, if you've seen it, is actually built into the hill. And so there's not a lot of room to move any further south. And so due to the size, and it's got a very small parking area and a very small apron out front for the trucks to pull out, and the site's just not conducive to really any type of construction of a new facility there.
Other questions?
I mean, yeah.
Go ahead.
Even if we did use one of those parking lots, would that affect the price?
At this point in time, our numbers are based on gross square footage of the building,
Right.
and so those numbers probably wouldn't
Okay.
change. And so I think some of the things that we had talked about that would still need to be explored is kind of the positioning of the drive-through apparatus space, because that was kind of an important piece of this, which would then probably help us if we didn't have parking on that north side. So there's a couple of different configurations, but just for conversation purposes, we just kind of focused on square footage and would that square footage fit somewhere on that site. So,
And
Other questions? Yep.
I mean,
Deb? Yep.
it's not really for Wald or even for the fire chief. I mean, my questions really are, it's been a long time since we tried to acquire property for something like this. When we did the new Fire Station 1, it was already city property, and so I'm a little curious, sort of what the obstacles might be for land acquisition. There seems to be places that might be viable. There's a lot of commercial properties that are, vacant or becoming vacant, and it seems like there might be some, but I just don't know. It seems like it would be complicated and hard and potentially extremely expensive, so it would be yet another expense. And then a comment would be that I talked to Mike this morning at length about funding mechanisms, and to Paula's point about having a lot of needs, sort of looking at our big needs like the marsh and public safety, just sort of dividing and conquering between possibly sales tax, if we can get that over the hump, and bonding, and I think there's a way forward if we phase it in, which we have to. But I really am curious about the land acquisition challenges, and sort of if we have any ideas about the cost involved in that, sort of what's involved, how one goes about casting about looking for those properties.
So those are rhetorical questions, I'll take.
Well, I don't think they're for Wald or the fire chief, but.
For tonight, but there are questions that will need to be
Yeah,
tackled.
but those are things that I'm curious about, yeah.
All right.
You know, I would just add, Brad, real quick, that, no, we haven't gone through that in-depth identifying potential sites.
Right.
That's a phase down the road,
Yeah.
if you will, in terms of further evaluating where we're gonna ultimately go. I think before we even decide on sites, are we thinking renovation or new construction? And if it's new construction, certainly site acquisition or siting is part of that conversation. So, very good points, and I think that's just part of the process.
So, council, any other comments or questions anyone wants to make?
I guess I got a comment. I guess I'm kind of blown away. I'm almost speechless, like with the price of these, fire stations and how much it's going to cost with so many different needs in our city. And I'm just thinking about if we don't start addressing these fire stations, how long do we have with the growth of our city, with new residents coming, and how much time do we have to put it off? That's what I'm thinking about. Is this something that we need to be addressing now, or is this something that we can pause for a little bit? And if we did pause, how much time do you think will our city outgrow the fire stations that we have right now? That's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Because I'm almost speechless. I'm stuck in my seat right now. I'm frozen right now.
Yeah, and I know some of you are newer on the council, so maybe weren't here when we did Station 1. A good frame of reference for that, from when we decided to do a new station to the time we moved in, was over almost 4 years, I believe. So it's quite a lengthy process to do a new facility from, and that starts from first you have to do the financing on how you're gonna do that, and then there's design phases and construction, and so it's quite a lengthy process.
I think that's a good point, just where we are today. If you consider this kind of the first starting place somewhat, because we had your first.
Well, you gotta raise the question.
Right, the first time we were exposed to potential renovations or new construction was our master plan. That was a year ago. And so now a year later, we've done station analysis, and to the chief's point, even if today you say, let's move forward with something, we're still a few years away from actually turning Earth. And so it is a lengthy process, and that's why we started having these conversations today, because of the need. And I would say more of the critical need, and turn to the chief to answer this question, is more about the staffing. So if you look at our facilities, yes, they're 40 years old, 45 years old.
Which doesn't sound that old to me anymore.
No. Just it's like they were yesterday.
Yeah.
So they're 40 years old, and they're, again, I think we've already expressed this, 40 years ago is just much different than we are today, and more of the critical need is around the staffing levels. How we're going to staff these stations. Yes, there's the critical safety elements of today's providing safety protections to our firefighters in terms of the exhaust and the chemicals, and having that separation like we've done in Station 1. But it's more about the staffing side of things, as we now added full-time staffing. We're going to continue to add more full-time staffing and having the facilities to match that need. And feel free to jump in, Chief, if I missed something in that.
No, thanks, Mike. And with our service level objectives that we're going to present to you, everything kind of ties into that. So as we come forward with budgetary requests, whether it's staffing, whether it's new trucks or fire stations, it all feeds in to the service level objectives, which you as a council set, because you get to set the level of standard that we're going to provide, and then everything we do kind of orbits those service level objectives. So that not only gives you the ability to directly see that the impacts that we're having on those, whether we're hiring those people or buying equipment, you can see, are we trending in the right way? Are we meeting hitting those goalposts that we set? And it makes it a lot easier then to ask the questions and to see if we're not achieving those objectives that, you know, do we have to do something different? So it all kind of ties right into that. And fire stations are just a portion of it.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I would say is, I guess if you take a step back from this whole exercise, it's a planning exercise. And when we first embarked on the public safety master plan, it was to be forward thinking. It was about positioning the city for success long term. And so we're not at a critical need where something has to be done. So we're in a position of, we have the time to study this, to do it right. And it is a planning exercise for the long-term future of the city. And so I think as a council, and frankly, as a staff, I think this is the exciting time because we get a chance to plan and look at what does Minnetonka public safety look like for decades to come.
Other comments, council? I've got a few. Now, Kimberly, did you have any more? I don't want to ignore you. Okay, we're good. You know, as I recall, when we started planning for Station 1, that was before we did our public safety master plan. And I think the thinking was, and correct me, Chief, if I'm wrong, we thought that we could do the city with one centrally located state-of-the-art facility, which we built. And we really felt that the satellites were not going to be that, correct me if I'm wrong, were not going to be that necessary. And then we did the public safety master plan, and we realized, nope, we not only need more than Station 1, but we need all 4 of our satellite stations. And then I also recall that, particularly the Roland Road Station, we felt that there might be a better location for that given the growth of the city and the dynamics of Opus. So, you know, there's a lot of things and things change over, you know, actually you want to say over time, but not that much time. And technology changes and medical information changes. You learn more and you learn more about the risks and the risks you have to mitigate. And then training has changed so dramatically. And I think that's part of the challenge with our paid on call, that you know, it's tough to recruit firefighters, but it's also tough to keep them, because I think that the amount of training that's required make people who maybe were enthusiastic realize, boy, this is a bigger commitment than I wanted to make. And so it's tougher to get them and it's tougher to keep them, because not everybody can handle the degree of expertise and training required. So that's the world we're existing in. Those are the kind of the uncontrollables, but the realities that we have to deal with. And then I think, you know, we're going to talk about response times and things. I mean, and you know, these are the challenges that we face. I mean, we say how critically important public safety is, and this is where the rubber meets the road. And these are tough calls, tough decisions that we're going to have to make. But a couple of things that I would add is, in each case for these satellite stations, we said our land is constrained, and that's a constraint. But should we be satisfied with that? Should we say, you know what, for some of these stations we're going to need more land, or we're going to have to figure out how to get it? If that means relocate and buy different land, okay, that's one thing. I mean, let's design to be as good as we can be, at least maybe in a couple of stations. Maybe we can't do that everywhere. But if we have land restrictions, I mean, when we looked at Station 2, I kind of kept thinking, that L-shaped lot, you know, have we talked to that property owner next door? Do they really need that? Would they like to move to another part of the city, maybe a little farther away from a fire station? Probably wouldn't help their insurance, but you know, I mean, and we're not here to problem solve, but we are here to think critically about, okay, if we're designing for the long term, what do we really need? Let's kind of take the blinders off, and then when we get the projected cost of it, then maybe we start trimming around the corners as we have to, rather than limiting ourselves and not consider optimal solutions because we're afraid of the cost. I think clearly we care about the cost, but I think we have to think expansively, and if there are ways to get some more land near, or maybe we have to relocate a station to make it more optimal. We wouldn't build a station into a hill if we were doing it today. So, you know, maybe we have to take the blinders off a little bit because it's public safety. I mean, if we're talking about maybe an ice rink, okay, maybe we could, you know, it'd be a little different, but this is public safety. So I think we have to go in with that attitude that what do we have to do to get it right? So a couple of thoughts to chew on, but I mean, I think this is a great start. Anything else, anyone? But it is daunting, Kizzy. I totally, I get it.
With
I
you,
mean, they're big
Kizzy.
numbers. They're big numbers. And it's not like that's the only thing that we're gonna consider.
Right.
So with that, I'll turn it back. Chief or Mike?
All
Okay,
right,
Chief?
perfect, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And we'll move on to our service level objectives.
Paige and John, thank you
Thank
very
you for
much for being
coming.
here
Thank
tonight.
you.
Council, thank you.
Oh. And with that, I'm going to bring up Assistant Chief Aaron Morris, who's going to walk us through our service level objectives. So in our council staff report, we did pose a couple of questions in there as we discussed this tonight, and Aaron will bring those up again. But as he kind of goes through this, think about those questions, because again, everything we do really orbits around these objectives. So this is what ultimately in the long term is going to help us make some of these budgetary decisions. It's going to help, it helps us with when we're looking at what equipment do we buy, how many people do we need to hire, and where do we place those people? As we talk about the fire stations, you know, how do we most optimally deploy our resources to help meet these standards? So it's really an important piece to what we do, and also can long-term tie into our overall accreditation process that we're currently going through. So with that, I will turn it over to Aaron, and he can go through this presentation, and we'll have questions at the end again. Yep.
Welcome, Chief Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Appreciate it. So with our service level objectives in the staff report, we have two requests for council for direction. First, how do the proposed service level objectives with council expectations align with the council expectations? And are there areas where you'd like to see higher or lower benchmarks? And then two, does the city council support the proposed service level objectives as outlined by the fire department? And are there additional priorities or changes that you would like to see? So the Center for Fire Accreditation International, or the Center for Public Safety Excellence, defines benchmark as a quality performance standard or a target from which performance can be judged. Our service level objectives aim to establish benchmarks for our department's consistent provision of our emergency services. A little bit of a historical context for you. In 2022, as mentioned earlier, Citygate was hired to provide a facility and staff report. In those recommendations, those were based on department staffing and call volume in 2022. That report stated, as kind of was already mentioned, the 5 fire stations in the city of Minnetonka were prudently located around the city. And Citygate believed the department could meet service level objectives if all 5 fire stations were permanently staffed 24/7. So the Public Safety Master Plan was designed to meet the Citygate's recommendations. And the department's approach to the Public Safety Master Plan has been both deliberate and intentional and focused on kind of the totality of operations, as mentioned earlier, including staffing, stations, and our equipment. So this is an outcome-based plan that's designed to be nimble and flexible. 2025 is our second year of the Public Safety Master Plan, as outlined. And we truly appreciate the significant investments you've already made in public safety to date. So with the investments, I'll show you something, basically a timeline of our staffing and what we've done with the additional investment. So initially, when we started out in 2022, we just had Station 1 staffed entirely by paid on call. The map, the graphic you see in the green, is areas that we can travel to in a 5-minute travel time from Station 1. In September of 2022, we added 9 additional career firefighters, and we staffed Station 3 24 hours a day, covering 1 and 3. A year later, in July 2023, we added 3 more firefighters, which reinforced our staffing and allowed for us to cover vacation days, sick days, etc. A year later, in July 2024 last year, we added 3 additional career firefighters, which allowed us to staff Rescue 1 out of Station 1 with paid-on-call involvement. So that allowed us to do 2 engines and 1 rescue covering the city, so 3 trucks with paid-on-call participation. Coming up in July, actually September, once we get those firefighters on board, we're going to add 9 more career firefighters this year, and we'll be able to staff Station 5 in that blue area. This will give us 3 to 4 engine companies with paid-on-call participation. And then ultimately, ideally, we'd like to get all 5 fire stations staffed, covering the entire city of Minnetonka within a 5-minute drive time, which is critical to why we need the 5 fire stations. We can look at consolidation, but that will affect drive time. In the Citygate study, they identified the 5-minute drive time as prudent. This is rooted in industry best practices. NFPA 1710 actually calls for a 4-minute drive time from all fire stations, but due to the challenging geography of Minnetonka with the creek and the freeways and Grays Bay, et cetera, it is virtually impossible to get anywhere in 4 minutes time. So they suggested adding additional minute of travel time to get us with the 5-minute time frame for our service level objectives. Each of our 5 stations divided up, we looked at the probability of our major hazards in each of those. So those hazards include structure fires, vegetation fires, EMS calls, hazardous materials and technical rescue incidents, as well as marine or water incidents. And virtually all the 5 station districts are virtually the same, with EMS calls being our highest probability, structure fires, technical rescue, and water incidents being moderate level risk and probability-wise, and vegetation and hazardous materials incidents being a low risk for us in each of the 5 districts. So the reason we're here tonight, service level objectives. So what we've defined as staff as our service level objectives for structure fires, and this is based on the 90th percentile or 90% of the time, we want our first arriving truck to arrive at your front door within 6 minutes of 20 seconds of you calling 911. The arrival of the full effective response force, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second, is within 11.5 minutes. And the full effective response force based on NFPA 1710 is 17 firefighters. A little bit of task math, and I apologize, the screen is covered up in the room, but we need 1 firefighter to take command. We need a couple firefighters at the hydrant and the truck to establish a water supply. We need 2 firefighters to put initial attack line in place, 2 more to put a backup line for their safety and additional fire attack, 2 more on deck or as a rapid intervention team to protect the firefighters that are actually interior fighting the fire, 2 more to do search, 2 more to do security, to secure utilities or provide support, 2 more for ventilation, 2 more for safety and division supervision, totaling 17 total firefighters on scene within 11.5 minutes. And again, that is rooted in 1710, National Fire Protection Association. Oh, there it is. When it comes to EMS calls, we want our first arriving unit to arrive in 6 minutes. Oh.
Blame it on Mike. What's this for?
All right.
Kimberly's moving around.
Yeah, just floating on the screen. Amazing. So 90% of the time, or 90th percentile, we want our first arriving apparatus to arrive within 6 minutes. Those first arriving EMTs are going to be able to do a rapid scene size up, take command, assess the need for additional resources, and administer the patient care needs based on state and local protocols. And the reason 6 minutes is critical is, as mentioned earlier, every minute in cardiac arrest, the survival rate is reduced by approximately 7 to 10%. So we need to get there quickly. One thing to note, the national average for cardiac arrest survival is between 3 and 4%. In the Twin Cities metro area, because of the bundle of care that we offer, it's double that, and it's between 8 to 10%. And some of our new techniques that we're learning from studies at HCMC and so on and so forth are actually leading to better survival. So we're proud to say that we are first in the nation in cardiac arrest survival.
Excellent.
So kind of where have we been and where have we got to in the past couple years with the additional staffing? For overall response, this is just every single call we have in the city. In 2023, we had approximately 5,700 calls, same with 2024. We dropped from 11.5 minutes from 911 to arrival for all calls. First arriving engine from 11.5 minutes to 11 minutes, 6 seconds. And that was based primarily on staffing another station. As we staff a third station, we expect a continued decrease. Likewise, with EMS calls, the 90th percentile of call response, 10.5 minutes in 2023, down to 10 minutes and 7 seconds, first quarter for 2025. When it comes to technical rescue and hazardous materials incidents, we've divided them up into low risk or high risk incidents. For a low risk incident, or a high-risk incident, the first arriving, again, is 6 minutes and 20 seconds. The bifurcation is when we get to the effective response force. For a low-risk incident, which on the technical rescue side would be basically a entrapment in a vehicle, or on a hazardous material is a hit gas line or power line down call. We want 6 firefighters arriving as part of that effective response force. In terms of high-risk incidents, again, 6 minutes, 20 seconds. There's a recurring theme here. With the effective response force of 10 firefighters arriving 10 minutes and 20 seconds. The high-risk incidents are going to be technical rescues or major hazardous materials incidents that may require state resources or specialized equipment. Vegetation fires, again, first arriving, 6 minutes, 20 seconds. Arrival of the effective response force, which is 8 total firefighters, which includes 2 engines and a brush truck, would be approximately 10 minutes and 20 seconds. Water incidents, first I'd like to note that the primary response to emergencies involving water in the state of Minnesota belong to and fall to the Sheriff's Department. So Hennepin County Water Patrol is in charge of primary response, and Minnetonka Fire supplements their response. And keep in mind that Water Patrol could be as far away as Champlin on the river or downtown Minneapolis or out on the west side of Lake Minnetonka, depending on when the call comes in. So we want our first arriving unit to arrive in 8 minutes, a little bit slower than other responses, but we have to trailer all of our boats to the launch. So we need the extra time to hook up the trailer and pull the trailer. We like to deploy rescue operations 3 minutes after arrival. Some of the forces that could affect our response that we've seen already and could continue to come up in the future, OSHA mandates. I know earlier they mentioned a lot about the diesel capture exhaust systems and separating clean from dirty areas in the station. We also have OSHA mandates in terms of 2 in, 2 out for safety. There's a new OSHA standard that was announced a year and a half ago, the emergency response standard that will drastically change the fire service if it's enacted. It's still in the rulemaking phase. Simultaneous or overlapping calls. It's huge for us. We've trended anywhere from 20% to up to 37% in the first quarter of 2025, where these calls have come out when there's an additional call for service at the same time. Our organizational changes with recruitment and retention, both career and paid on call. And then change in mutual aid availability. Right now we rely very heavily for the effective response force on our mutual aid resources in our neighboring cities, and everyone's getting busier and they may not be able to support that response. So again, ultimately, the City Council is going to set the service level objectives for the fire department through general and capital budgets. question we have for you tonight is how do the proposed service level objectives align with your expectations? And are there areas where you'd like to see higher or lower benchmarks? And does the council support these service level objectives? Are there additional priorities or changes that you would like us to consider?
All right, that's, thank you, Chief. I mean, that's a mouthful, and I'll just make a couple of quick comments, then I want to hear from fellow council members. But first of all, as I was reading this packet, I was just kind of overwhelmed with and appreciative of all the work that you do and what you do in a very short period of time. And that is it's very impressive. And clearly, we know that seconds matter, and you know that seconds matter. And obviously, we'd like the shortest response times possible, just as you would. But one of the things when I talked to Mike, I said, well, what's the context? Because, I mean, reading the report initially and say, well, 6 minutes and 20 seconds, is that good, bad, or mediocre? But I think your report did a good job of showing where we are, and, if you can get to all those places in 5 minutes, I mean, you're basically giving yourself a minute and 20 seconds to do a lot of stuff, and I don't even have an appreciation for all the stuff that you have to do. So I want to thank you all for what you do, and for the level. I mean, the thing that just impressed me so much is the level of coordination and training it takes, so that every individual, when you have your effective response force of 17 individuals, they're there, they know what to do, they each have a job, they get to it, they work with each other, you do it safely, and you get it done. And that's extremely impressive. And so I couldn't help but be impressed with all that you do as I read the report. But I appreciate you providing the kind of the benchmark of where we are, because without that, then I'm sitting there thinking, well, gee, I'd really like it to be no minutes and 10 seconds, but we know that that's impossible, not realistic. But your report was really good, and it providing that context puts us in a position perhaps to answer these challenging questions. So with that, Council, Rebecca.
Thanks, Brad. So can we go back to that screen with the response times that are historical? Yeah. Maybe this is a longer term question slash strategy, because I had the same experience Brad had. I shared with Mike. I'm like, yeah, great. I mean, if you're telling us that's where they should be, it was hard without this context. I think one thing that would be helpful as we're making budgetary decisions and going forward, and this is really identifying, okay, with bringing on 9 more staff or whatever, this is where we anticipate we'll go in the next 12 months, so we can see, and of course those are going to be estimates, but so we can kind of see how that direct impact, because this is compelling. I mean, 30 seconds is a long time. 33 seconds is a long time in context. So to be able to understand, and for us to be able to say, yeah, this is where that money is going, and bringing us closer to those response time goals.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And one of the things we're doing is setting up the dashboard that you as a city council will have access to. So you'll have real-time data that shows where our response time's at, our effective firefighting and response force. And when the consultants did the report, our numbers that we're proposing are actually a little bit higher than the national standards. And part of that reason is, as they said, even with all of our fire stations staffed, due to our road system, we can only be so good, because our streets do prohibit us somewhat. We are the land of 10,000 cul-de-sacs, so we are prohibited a little bit as far as how fast we can get to a location. So we've adjusted those numbers accordingly, and we can adjust them more too. We can adjust them to whatever, as a city, we feel is a reasonable service level to provide. But you're right, we should be able to show, as we add staffing and make changes to fire stations, we should be able to show how those changes or those things that we're implementing are paying off towards these service level objectives, which is why I said at the beginning, kind of everything orbits around this. And if we can't meet these, then we have to look at what are we doing wrong? Or do we need to pivot and make some changes? And these are, some of them are longer term goals. These are not objectives that we can necessarily achieve overnight. They're long term. Part of it is staffing. Part of it is looking at where our busiest areas are and putting our resources as close to those areas as we can to maximize that. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it. But
Great.
Very good.
Mayor?
Paula?
I just had a quick question. Are these overall response times, are they the effective response time or initial?
that is the initial first arriving unit 90% of the time.
Okay, so that's the initial response.
Yep. Yep.
So right now we're at 11:06 and our goal is to be 6:20.
Yeah. So we're about double where we should be. And when Aaron was showing you that map that shows the 5-minute response time, you can see how our coverage of the city within that response time increases dramatically for every station that we staff up. The consultant believed in their report that if we were to staff all 5 stations, we would have about 95% coverage of the city within that 5-minute range. We'll never hit 100%, but we can get pretty close. Right now, with just our Station 3 on the south end and our Station 1 staffed, we're covering about just over 60% of the city within that 5-minute, which then is reflected in our response times. And with Ridgedale, for example, being one of our busiest areas and that we don't staff up there 24 hours a day, that drives up those overall numbers because a large portion of our call volume is that Ridgedale area.
Other questions? Deb?
So, thinking holistically, I mean, you were talking about some of the pressures that affect response times, and some of it has to do with, I mean, EMS calls are going up. As I remember, police does a lot of initial EM response, and it's moving to fire. So there's that. And then, we've had these ongoing discussions with our friends at the county. And so to me, what if the county does not sort of rise to the occasion and improve their response times, and we have these overlapping calls, or we have staff on, I mean, how is that going to, is that part of your calculation? Or I'm just wondering how those pressures are going to drive the numbers, because if you're getting more EM calls, you're more likely to have the overlapping calls. And of course, staffing will help, but you'll still have that additional pressure of more calls.
Yeah, so right now we have a minimum of 2 trucks on duty. With our paid on call, we are at certain hours are able to go up to 3 trucks. So to your point, for every call we have takes a truck dedicated to that, or a crew dedicated to that. And so if 30% of our calls are overlapping, that means over a third of the time we have 2 or more trucks tied up. Well, if we only have 2 trucks on duty, then we have no resources available other than to call people in. And then when we do that, that increases that response time dramatically. So being able to staff additional or have additional resources on duty helps to ensure that we have resources available for any calls that come in. So it's not just about always the 5-minute response time. Sometimes it's just about having resources available for that next call that comes in. And to your point with the EMS, that's part of kind of our long-term plan too. As we look out over these last 3 to 4 years in this public safety master plan, is really taking a look at those staffing challenges, and the staff that we're going to bring on is really to focus on what does that staff look like long term. It might be paramedics that would ride on our engines, for example, that are going to be able to provide some of those advanced life support functions before an ambulance can get there. That's one of the things we'll have to evaluate as we go through.
And Kimberly, I know you had a question. So I'm doing better at doing that, looking.
Yes, I did. So you partially answered my question. I was initially going to ask with, given our spaghetti thrown at the wall road pattern, if that was contributing to if the 6.5 minutes was reasonable given that, and if there was a national benchmark to compare to. But so my question now is, I keep hearing that this 5-minute mark, and then all the lists in the report are 6 to 6.5 minutes. So is that extra minute and a half coming from the time the call comes in to 911 to the time it's dispatched, or so what's the difference from getting from 5 to 6 or 6.5 minutes?
Yeah, so the 5-minute is the actual drive time. The overall response is from the time somebody calls 911. There's national standards for everything. So the call processing time on the dispatch side, the 90th percentile for them is to process that call and have it pushed out in 90 seconds. And then there's a portion that we call turnout time, and that's the time from the moment dispatch notifies us of the call to the time we pull out of the station. That's our turnout time. And for medicals, the national standard for that is 90 seconds or 60 seconds for medicals, 90 seconds for fire calls, because we have to put more equipment on before they roll out. So then you add all of those numbers up, and that's then what puts you into that overall response time realm of around that 6.5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm just going to do a process check thing because I'm really going to try and keep things moving. So we're going to do this till 7:30. So if there's any more questions, if you have a question, please get them in, and then we'll try and wrap up at 7:30 so we can move on with the rest of our program. Anyone? Paula?
This, and I'm sorry if this is an old question or as somebody who's a more recent council member. So when we do EMS calls, because it looks like by far that's the most common, I mean, I think we had 12 fires last year in 2023, something like that. I don't know how many we have, but it was a pretty low number compared to all of the EMS. And if I recall correctly, and it just sounds like the issue is we had 2 engines or X number of engines. And so, and you were talking about paramedics riding along on engines. Is there any thought, given that we have so many EMS calls, of having kind of smaller, or do we already have that and I'm just not aware?
Yeah, we do currently run a smaller vehicle when we have it staffed. That's always the great debate, is do you run a smaller apparatus versus a larger apparatus? And the reason we run primarily engines to even EMS calls is we got to bring all of the equipment with us all the time, because if a fire comes in and our crews are out, let's say they're out on an EMS call, they're clearing, they get a structure fire, they're the closest unit to that structure fire, they need the personnel, the equipment, the resources needed to engage in that event when they're the first arriving. Now, the more units you have on duty gives us more flexibility to try to do some things with more of a smaller rapid response vehicle for those. But with limited resources right now, especially if we only have 2 vehicles on duty, sometimes 3, it's very difficult to run in a smaller apparatus and run the risk. And we've seen it with our rescue where they'll show up to a fire first because they were the closest, and they can't really do much. They have no water, they have no hose, they have no no rescue equipment. So they have to then wait till the larger truck arrives to be able to engage in those firefighting activities. So, but again, as we expand, it does give us the flexibility to look at some of those other options.
But I'm assuming as staffing levels increase, like you said, when you say as we progress, hopefully that would give more options.
Yes.
For that, especially given, like I said, the overwhelming majority of calls seem to be.
Yep, and that's something we constantly evaluate.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're pretty close. Did anyone have a last question? Otherwise, I want to thank you for being here. And anyone?
Are we supposed to answer these questions?
Yes, answer the questions. Yes, we are. Okay, so let's do that. Throw those questions up there again, so we've got them. Okay. The first one on expectations on these response times. Comments, council, on that? Yep, Rebecca?
I support these. I think they're good. I think we should include some kind of reference, or, if we're gonna publish this or have it laid out, that's a phase-in. Because if I'm a resident and I'm looking at this and like, our goal is 6:20 and we're at 11:06, what's going on? So, some kind of language that finesses that.
Yep.
Okay.
Other comments?
I agree, and I mean, I think there's nobody that knows better what it takes to get to better benchmarks than the chief, and so I defer to their professional expertise, and so I agree, and I agree with what Rebecca's saying as well. I'm always a more data person, so things that help me understand how it's going to work and why. I think it does two things. It helps set the benchmarks, and it also helps people understand why we're raising the levy to pay for firefighters. So it kills two birds with one stone. And does the council support the service levels for the fire department additional priorities? I think we're going, honestly, I think we're going as fast as we can. I think we kind of understand what we're trying to aim for here, and we're always gulping hard and trying to, like I said when we were walking in, praying to the finance gods for money to rain down from heaven. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Other comments?
I also
Izzy?
support the service level objectives. They laid it out. You see the numbers going down. You can't deny that. So I support it. And then I think when we do, if we get to the place where we're approving the budget, and I think that's going to be very important to lay it out to residents. Why? Because I was on Nextdoor, and all you hear is about, the taxes and.
You should stay off Nextdoor.
I know.
I was going to say,
I know,
you're
but
a
I'm
brave
just saying,
woman.
you see it.
Just avoid
go
Nextdoor. Life is better. Trust me
Yeah.
on that.
So yeah.
Peter will tell you that later.
But yeah, I support it. Evidence speaks for itself. So
Kimberly, do you have a comment? Yep.
Yep, just real quick. Now just, let you guys know, I can't see any of the slides, but I did find the questions in the packet, so I can answer. Yes, just quickly, yes, I agree with the benchmarks and set forth, and yes, I agree with the service objectives.
Very good. Anyone else have any comments?
No.
Patsy?
I agree as well. And the one thing that when I was going over this weekend and I heard fire engines, it brought a whole new thinking to hearing fire engines.
Yes.
And appreciation. And I think it's important that we really let the public know too, because
Absolutely.
it changed the way wow, what goes into this is incredible. And I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So to wrap up on this, again, thank you. And I think that the issue of context is really important. I think Rebecca summed it up well when, we've got a 6-minute and 20-second first arrival objective, and that that sounds good, that makes sense, but we are at 11 minutes. Why is that? Help us understand that. And, these problems could solved, if we had unlimited funds, you could solve these problems much more quickly, but we don't have that. And this is the tough thing, I think, for a council when you're dealing with potentially saving human lives and you're talking money. If you had more money, you'd save more lives. I mean, and so it almost puts, a dollar value on a human life, which we don't want to do. But we have the practical reality of what we're doing. We want top-notch public safety. We have to set those objectives. But the funds are, the public's ability to deal with those is limited. But the more information, to Patsy's point, the more information that we can provide and the more transparency we can on how we're evaluating this and going about it, I think will help our case. Because I think this work is critically important. I agree with these objectives. And, I think we have to explain, why we've got them and how we're going to get there. So thank you very much. Anything else?
Just real quick, if I could, Brad, not to jump in at the
You're
end
good.
here.
You're good.
I'll just say, again, thank you to the council, mayor and council, for your support of our staff. I think when we started, I rewind the clock when we embarked upon the public safety master plan, because I'll use the word position again. And it was all about positioning the city. Because rewind the clock a couple years ago, we knew through our community survey, and we'll talk about that here in a second, that our public safety professionals, both police and fire, get really high remarks, or highly valued. But now we're actually transitioning into what does that mean really in terms of these service level objectives. And so part of the public safety master plan and positioning for the future was to evaluate all of that, to put these benchmarks in place, so then we as a city and you as a council can look at our constituents and be able to express thank you to our constituents for supporting all of us in these investments, because I think as you heard from our chiefs today, it's all about what are those outcomes. We're buying outcomes.
Right.
And what outcomes do we want to buy? And so I think what you're seeing is that decrease in response times. We're going to further to see those decrease in response times. You see the work that they do behind the scenes of putting schedules together and making sure we've got the right people during the right shifts when the calls are happening so we can have the right response with the right resources. And so, again, real credit to our chiefs as we continue to have this conversation about that long-term positioning. So appreciate your support, council. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great to see you tonight. All right, quick process check. Does anyone want a 5-minute break? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break and then we will jump into our community survey. Let's see, are we ready? Okay.
Should I have this
on? Oh, yeah, you should, yeah.
Okay. That's all they can say.
But they,
All right, let's see, who are we waiting on?
Well, that's what you saw the comments on. They're like, why don't you do it? Like, it's so easy to critique. You know, that's what I was thinking.
Find the, oh, we're solid green now. Okay.
I mean, somebody.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no.
All right,
Whatever.
we will
Gotta
start
do what you
again.
gotta do.
So I will kick it over to Sarissa after this introduction, and welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Mayor. We have Peter Leatherman here, which I believe you all have met. He's with the Morris Leatherman Company, and he has conducted our survey for 20-plus years. Just to give a brief timeline of the community survey, we started the discussion with the leadership team in January, and then we brought our themes, and you guys were also able to weigh in on themes during the February study session. And then after that study session, we brought those themes back to leadership, and then we drafted questions, and Peter finalized the questions for us. And he conducted the survey, I believe, in March for 3 weeks. And then he will provide the results tonight, and then you will have to accept the survey results and the merit scoring at the May 19th council meeting.
Very good.
And before I pass it over to Peter, As Peter's going through the results, these are the questions we have for you. Does the city council have any questions? And then are there any results that the council wishes to further discuss or consider for a future study session? Peter?
Super.
Thank you, Sarissa. Peter, welcome.
We're turned on. It's a pleasure to be back with you. And tonight it's a twofer. We're doing the residents first, and then we'll talk about the business community. So once again, this is a shortened presentation. If we went through all the questions on the survey, we'd be here for a long time. So kind of the high level look at the city, how things compare historically, and then council had a few questions that we added in that were new. So we decided to include those in so you could see the feedback from the community. Just to review with everybody what we did, we talked with 400 randomly selected residents across the community. Interviews were conducted between March 11th and the 31st. Average interview time was 24 minutes. I always look to see how many people are on the phone for over an hour of their own volition. This time it was 11%. So 43 people on the phone for over an hour. You've probably heard from a lot of those 43 people. But once again, my phoners they are not paid by the interview. They're paid by the hour. So it doesn't matter if they do one or two. They're supposed to. If the person wants to expound, they can expound. Non-response rate was 6.5%, projectable to plus or minus 5%. And then putting up the demographics, 59% cell phone only, 11%, it shrunk by 1% this time, landline only, and then 30% had both landline and cell phone. Some of the key demographics that we track in the survey to validate the sample against updated census information, but then to look at differences, households with children versus households with seniors, those sorts of things. So first off, residential longevity. 28% have been in the city for 5 years or less, while 26% have been in the city for over 20 years. The typical resident has been in the community just short of 10 years now. So you do have a growing segment of newbies, what I would call in that under 5-year category. We saw kind of, not surprisingly, in 2021, 22, kind of slow down the transition with the pandemic kind of halted people moving. It's picked up. I'll be curious to see what happens in the coming years with interest rates and everything that you hear about economic-wise. Households with seniors and households with children were equal, 28%. 26% indicated they were renters. We asked the home value. The plurality of folks had homes valued at over $450,000. So I think the first thing I would say for next year's survey is we adjust the home prices. We push them up. So we want equal sections within the categories at this point in time.
Our median house price is over 500 now.
Yeah, yeah.
So when the high is below our median, that probably needs to go up.
We need to bring it up in order for people to fall into categories for next time. Continuing with the demographics, 26% are 18 to 34-year-olds, while 39% are over the age of 55. Typical residents about 47 years old. 73% were white, 10% African American, 7% Asian, 6% Hispanic, and then 4% indicated multiracial. Women outnumbered men by 5% in the sample, and then the wards, nobody knows what ward they live in. We know what ward they live in from the list we draw, and so we code it. We don't ask people, or it'd be probably 10% of people could tell us what ward. So the wards are established based on registered voters within the wards. Any questions on demographics or methodology?
Just one question. It's probably not really on methodology, but did we do any, when we have people that are newbies, for lack of a better term, do we know where they came from?
We have not asked historically.
Okay.
That might be something to consider. Like fast-growing communities, like I think of like Woodbury in the 90s would ask, what city did you move from?
Right.
So that might be something to think about for future survey, just to see where the migration is coming from into the community.
Well, I think it's interesting for a community like ours that is increasingly diversifying.
Yep.
And there's also kind of the central city flight that we're seeing in a lot of communities. So it might be interesting to see if that is affecting our growth as a community. So it just note and move on, but it's something I'm curious about.
Yep.
Yeah.
climate refuge.
Yep.
A couple open-endeds. First off, what do they like most about the city? It is, and it still remains, the small town values in the community is what they resonate to. It's the friendly people, it's the schools, the lake, the housing neighborhood, safe, trails. Then we get the suburban responsive location. Then we go back to quiet and peaceful, trees and nature, parks, open spaces, city services, shopping, recreation facilities. It has always been the case here that what they value in Minnetonka is the small town attributes as opposed to the suburban.
But nobody said city council. I mean,
Nobody. That was the second. They could say many things. We just
Okay.
code the first, Mr. Mayor.
Very good.
What's the most serious issue facing the community? It did come down. It was about 30% last year, but leading the list still is high taxes, and that continues to be the big issue across the state of Minnesota. I see it in every city survey, every school district survey, every statewide survey, basically since 2022, is a growing concern on property taxes, kind of back to where we were in the late 90s. With the Taxpayers League when they rose up in Minnesota. And then lack of sidewalks. That is the second year in a row now that it's been double digits. So 2 data points, a trend does not make, you need a third one. But I would say that it is a very vocal minority, but it is double digits now that are bringing up lack of sidewalks as a serious issue.
I would hypothesize too that the work we've done to add trails has elevated the awareness, and so therefore that number, had we not added all those trails, lack of sidewalks would be probably lower because people moved here for what it was, not for what they hope it to be.
Potentially. And you do have, I mean, it's a metro-wide concern when you talk about pedestrian safety also, as a part of it coming in the mix too.
As it should be.
Yep. Down at the bottom, though, the nothings, you've always had this large booster core, that this is nirvana in Minnetonka, and it remains. 1 in 3 people see absolutely, and you'll be surprised as a council, there's no issues here. It's perfect. So, I mean, that's basically triple, quadruple. Typically, right now we're about 9-10%. It's coming back. People are starting to become more positive about things. In 2020, the norm was about 5%. We just found everything that we disliked. And it's come back. We're, about 9-10% now. But you've always had a large group of the booster core in your community. Overall evaluation of quality of life, 98%. What we have seen on this one, it's starting to come back. The norm before the pandemic was 90%. We slipped down to 80% in 21, 22. We're coming back up, about 85%. But the shift has kind of stabilized now with what we see in the excellent down a little bit, the shift to good. But what you don't have is a lot of communities have shifted from good to only fair. Okay, so it's still overwhelmingly 98%. I mean, that is at the top of the mark. So the goal will be, that excellent rating, the norm right now is 12%. Okay, so you're still 3 times higher than the norm. But the discussion, and as you do strategic planning and everything, and we've really never seen, some select issues come in that need to be fixed in the community. It's not about fixing, it's about enhancing enthusiasm. How do you move a person from a good to an excellent rating? That's the key always. And it's much easier to do. If somebody's unfavorable, conversion from unfavorable to favorable is much more difficult. It's much easier to build a person's enthusiasm. How welcoming is the community? Very stable. 98%, and you can see, that the very welcoming aspect has varied anywhere between 55 and 64%. Each survey within the plus or minus 5%, so a majority of people select the very welcoming category. How would they rate Minnetonka on 4 aspects? It's overwhelmingly positive, but I noted when I was here last year, we did have that shift from good to excellent. It's still favorable, but the good to excellent, and they really stabilize. So welcoming community for all, 87%. unchanged from last year. The excellent rating, 29%. The high was in 23 at 60%. Treating all residents with respect. It was 86 last time. It's now up to 89. Treating all residents fairly. 81 to 90. Service to residents of all backgrounds was 92, 89. So you do have about 10% that are saying only fair or poor. Very few poor. It's mainly only fair. But I think once again, the goal should be to try to get back to the 2022 levels where folks are saying it's excellent, not just good. Realizing, as I always say the caveat on Minnesota, it's hard to get Minnesotans to say anything's excellent.
That's true.
The priority for the city to create a diverse and inclusive and fair community. This time around, 72% indicate that it's either a high or moderate, 28% not to or not at all. You can see it's been very stable. The high priority between 20 and 25%. It's very static. The shift has been in the moderate to low, and part of it becomes when they view prioritization, it's the other things that could be a priority. You're pitting this against parks or streets and all of those sorts of things. So, this is going to fluctuate. If you go back 2 years ago, we had 28% or 30% in the low category. It's 28% now. So this one really varies, and it really varies with the issues of the current year when you think about how residents would prioritize this. City services overall, it's just a sea of blue. And even, the one going back many years ago, the pavement repair and patching, that caused all sorts of, I learned about mill and overlay. Never heard about it before when John Gagnon was city manager. And the survey results, I think we had about 40% unfavorable on that survey. And the city started the mill and overlay process. That 89 to 12 is just outstanding. It's not 100, we allow rounding between 99 and 101. But the norm, people have not been as hostile about street repair in the last 2 years because we haven't had horrible winters. So in bad winter time, you get that, it'd be about a 45% unfavorable. The last 2 winters, it's been about 35%. You still get the potholes, people are still, but that 12% unfavorable is the lowest we have in the last 3 years. Overall assessment of value of city services, and keep in mind that city taxes were the most serious issue by 22%. When the rubber hits the road, though, and they think about the city services they receive and the taxes they pay, it's an 88 to 10 value proposition. So once again, I can still think my taxes are high, but if the quality of services exceed that level, I rate the value positively. Keep in mind, 22% off the top of the head said the most serious issue is high taxes. Only 10% rated the value poorly. Do they support a tax increase to maintain city services? This really now is set. Everything that's happened in the economy, everybody knows now that it costs more to provide the same thing. So a property tax increase to maintain city services, 80% favor, 14% oppose. Keep in mind, 22% said the most serious issue is high property taxes. Only a third of them switched over and said, yeah, I would support to maintain services. But what we see in all our statewide is the maintenance piece, 70 to 80%. If you ask a property tax increase to improve or enhance, it goes to about 25%. That's where folks are at. I will support to maintain the enhancements there'll be resistance to. Prioritization of a property tax increase. Once again, I always feel bad. This chart is so unhelpful to council. I'd love to come in and say 70%, this is where folks want to focus. 29% say streets, 26% say parks and trails, 25% say police and fire, 12% say another service, only 5% say no, I don't want a property tax increase, and 4% are unsure. So it really, there's no clear prioritization, and there hasn't been for many years on this one. You would really have to go back to the time when the street repair was an issue, where that would come out. with a majority of people saying that's the place for prioritization. This was a new question we added. This was really interesting. We asked folks a series of 6 questions and asked about the funding of capital improvements. And we asked folks, would you prefer a sales tax, a property tax, or neither? The first thing I think to focus on is the neither. Okay? You have a majority support. The lowest amount of support you have is for renovations to Williston. It's still 66% supporting it. So upgrades to the fire station, 77%. Parks to Opus area, 75. Renovations to the community center, 69. Renovations to Williston, 68. Renovations to Marsh, 66. Expansion of trails, 75. So you have strong majorities supporting all of it. They're differentiating on what the funding source should be. You have majority on Parks to Opus being funded by the sales tax. 50% you hit on the expansion of trails, and on the upgrade of fire stations, I don't know quite what to make of it. It tips towards a property tax versus a sales tax, 37-40 on that. But you have a mandate to do something on all 6 items. The preference is the funding source, is where the debate is. Now, we did follow up, and we told people, if you knew that 54% of funding from a local option sales tax would come from residents outside the city. Does it,
They're like, let's do it.
Yep. Does that make you much more likely, somewhat more likely, less likely, or no difference? 67% said it made them somewhat or much more likely to support a local sales tax. Now, keep in mind, if you look at where the sales tax is, it's anywhere between 37 and 55, and now we have 67% saying this tips it. What you do is you basically, it's about half of all the people that say property taxes in this, say this makes me very much more or somewhat more likely to support the sales tax option. And that's the powerful argument. We've worked on local sales tax in Richfield, Golden Valley, Bloomington. This is the major messaging on a sales tax on why it makes sense to do it. And it has a very similar impact with your residents. Now the key is just to get the legislature on board. Problems in Minnetonka. I probably should say not problems in Minnetonka. They could say major, minor, or not a problem. You can see 66% of the storage of garbage and recycling cans, not a problem. 65% on-street night parking, 71% of the short-term rentals that we put on there. Those that see it as major problems, these are probably the folks that you've heard from. It's 5% of the storage of cans, 9% on-street parking, and 6% short-term rentals. So it really is, it's probably a very vocal group, but it's not expansive of the city as a whole. E-bikes, another issue. And this one, there's not a lot of concern, but those that are concerned are very intensely concerned. First off, 26% said they had an e-bike in their household. And we asked, do you have concerns about the use of e-bikes? 16% said they did. Of the 16%, 84% said it is a very or somewhat serious issue. So if you take 85% of 16%, it's about 1 in 8 people see this as a major issue. The rest don't see a problem at all. Importance for the city to take action on. This has been pretty stable now over the past few surveys. Some trading of positions in the top 5. What leads the list this year is energy conservation, water conservation, reducing waste, 75% or higher, drop down to 2/3 on climate change and stormwater management, and the expanding the transit options has always been a 50-50 proposition as residents have seen as a priority. It tips now to a majority saying it's not that important. Especially, they're not pitting it against each other, the other options, but expanding transit options. And we've seen this really in the metro area surveys we've done, of growing lack of interest of transit options. A lot of it, we might see as people are forced to go back to the office, that might change. Because, the immediate problem, I'm sitting in traffic, we have to do something about it. So it'll be interesting to track over the next couple of years. Concerns about residential lawn care, a little more concern than we saw in the previous issues for lawn chemicals. But that goes back to water conservation and improving stormwater management as a priority. So 59% were either very or somewhat concerned on lawn chemicals. Leaf blowers, not as much.
I have a resident I'm going to
32%.
send this
Yeah.
slide to, just so you know. A few of us know him. He's a good guy, but
He doesn't like leaf blowers?
doesn't like leaf blowers. And they're doing it right in Portland, just so you know.
Are they banned in Portland? I don't
Yeah,
know.
they
Okay,
are.
They are, okay.
They don't believe in individual liberty in Portland, but they do believe in banning leaf blowers.
How do they get rid of the leaves?
Electric.
Electric, which work really great.
I have electric, but it still makes noise.
It does.
Not as much.
Oh, it's not as much now? Okay, all right. I wear earplugs anyway.
That's good for 3 or 4 emails a year, just so you know.
Program for teenagers, overall 68%. But this becomes an awareness issue, and is it impacting them? Keeping in mind you have 28% of households indicating that they have children. So I looked and pulled out households with children. It's a smaller N. So we have approximately roughly 120 in the sample, so the margin of error. But it goes up to about 1/3 of households with children saying too few programs for teenagers. Input to zoning and development decisions. I mean, you've always been high, but it's interesting. You've got this 75%, 86%, 73%, back up to 88%. So whatever you do in the even years, you have more people saying no, but
No controversial projects.
do you only do controversial projects in even years? Is it okay? It's not an issue this year whatsoever. Job of the city staff. First off, 36% indicate that they've had quite a lot or some firsthand contact with city staff. Last year, it was 84% favorable. This time, 90% favorable. That's a statistically significant shift. And just, so it's a 90-9 ratio, 10-1, just right at the top when it comes to rating a staff of any public entity. And it kind of bears out when you get into the specifics. 41% have had contact with City Hall. Of that 41%, asking them customer service dimensions, 95% ease of reaching help, 87% courtesy, efficiency, 90%, 94% professionalism. Keeping in mind the threshold is 80% in public sector customer service, just off, and then that's what relates back then to the overarching rating of 90% favorable. And then finally, where are folks getting their information? The Minnetonka memo. Now, it did drop, but 2 years ago we decided to look at the brand of the Minnetonka. So we broke out the Minnetonka memo and city newsletter. So they had to specifically name the Minnetonka memo. So 42, you combine it, it's 56% of people saying that it's their primary source of information. It's the only newsletter that has a majority of people saying that it is their primary source of information, a majority at flat 56. We drop down to the website, and then we get down into social media, word of mouth, local newspaper. The one thing that you have been protected in is by having such a strong newsletter. What other communities have faced as local newspapers have disappeared, what's happened is the grapevine has exploded. There are school districts specifically that the number one source of information is the grapevine now. The newspaper disappeared, and a whole bunch of especially old guys who used to read the paper, they now just gossip. And that's why we see the growth of the Grapevine. But having that strong newsletter here has really insulated you from the growth of the Grapevine. It's not saying if we'd get down and ask people, do you rely on informal discussions, you would have a lot of people saying it, but it's not the first thing they're going to when they're getting information from the city. So that, I believe, is the last slide for the residential survey.
All right. Well, council, any further questions for Mr. Leatherman? Kimberly, yes, ma'am, excuse me.
Yes, I have a few. So, and I may have asked this last year, but I don't remember what the answer was if I did. When you look at, and I know the numbers are small, but for example, when you look at the people that say the city isn't very welcoming or not welcoming at all, is there the ability to look at the demographics of the people answering to the negative? And then somewhat, I mean, because it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but not completely. When we see some of the services that have the larger number of complaints, and again, I know the numbers are not that big, but is there a way to say look at the people that complain about snow plowing and not breaking the anonymity, but share with Will, hey, somebody on such and so street says you're doing a crappy job of removing the snow, like just to pinpoint the areas where people are dissatisfied.
Yeah, I believe you did ask that last year, and we did last year, and I can run the data again this year. Specifically the snow plowing, because we go down to the ward level. And so last year when we looked at the snow plowing, there were no differences between the wards. I mean, obviously that's large areas, but there were no differences. I believe I looked at ethnicity.
No background.
I believe I looked at the ethnicity, but I did not look this up. I will look at that and follow up with the staff.
Kimberly, anything else? You're good. You're good. Anyone else? Deb?
You know, the most dangerous question on earth about trash collection, organized trash. It's literally the most dangerous question ever. So that's question 75. So it seems like they're shifting. It's still a little bit clear as mud. And I remember, I think the first year I was on the council, there was like 80% favorable attitude towards organized trash, but 85% of those people opposed giving up their own collector. So I was wondering if you could break that one down for us, because it's getting to be more of a topic.
I will say, you're one of few communities that actually had a majority. It's a scant majority, margin of error. It's 53-44. What's really interesting to me on this question is the lack of intensity.
Yeah.
Only 18% strongly favored or strongly opposed, and it was equal, 10% to 8%. It kind of was always this 40-55 opposition. So you've kind of switched it. But in that strong support, strong opposition, there was much more of the strong than the soft. So I think there is a softening to the opposition and like a willingness to have a conversation. But once again, it's plus or minus 5%. It's a coin flip issue. If you talk about it, you'll have 10% of the community and 8% of the community in the council meetings. We followed up, so with the opponents, and we said, would you still oppose changing the trash collection if it meant lower costs? 45% said yes, 45% said no. Would you still oppose changing the trash collection if it meant fewer garbage trucks on streets, which could reduce street maintenance? 59% said they would still oppose. So it's interesting, the cost proposition had more people. I mean, it's, you know, if anybody cares, it's a push question. But I have it, their initial reaction, there was no, you know, values in the question. Once we know if they support or oppose, we could try to nudge them to see. The maintenance, street maintenance, it's the cost factor. So if you look at the cost factor, you can drop down your opposition. It's about 30% in the community. You're not going to budge. The question would be, you know, in some other cities that have gone through and done it, people support until you don't choose their hauler. But it's not, you don't have a majority opposition.
I think Eric's contract says that we're not going to go to organized. He took the job on that condition.
I think that was a noteworthy condition. Although I've worked out the perfect response to that question though when people write me, because I tell them, I said, well, it's interesting. I don't have the problems you define because my neighborhood does have organized collection because we have a homeowners association. So my recommendation to you is the city's not going to do it. But if you want to organize your neighbors, you could get the same benefits and we wouldn't be forced to impose something that people don't want. So go have at it. But I'm not doing it for you.
And I would say that I just wanted to make a comment that I found the questions on page 12, which are about recycling and organic waste. I thought those were really informative and they're helpful. And you know, I think we need to see that because it really talks about multifamily housing or certain housing conditions and why they're not participating. And I feel like that is a nut we might be able to crack now that we sort of have the reason.
Program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking those questions. That was really helpful.
All right, anything else, council? Otherwise, we've got another survey to go through. But I don't want to cut anybody off.
Brad, if we can ask the second question,
All right.
Organized garbage collection.
Yeah, is there anything that you'd like? I thought we were doing that, but
I just want to make sure we're clear on if there's, looking for direction from council to staff, if there's anything in the presentation or as you touched on some things that we weren't presented tonight that you would like to bring back for a future study session, that would be helpful.
I think it informs some of the discussions for the study sessions that we have coming up, but for me, there's nothing new.
Just for me, picking up on what Deb said and some of the other priorities in terms of climate action and conservation, I thought those answers were interesting and might inform kind of our future study sessions or just kind of what we're looking at doing for sustainability in our climate action planning. You know, or maybe that's something that staff can use when they present on that for us as potential future stops.
And then I think from my perspective too, future, I mean, the whole cannabis thing is, you know, TBD. We don't really have any information or any experience on it. And I think, you know, I think there's a certain amount of frustration at different levels for different reasons, given the uncertainty from the state. But I think that's going to be something that we're going to want to look into in the future. Not that it's going to necessarily be actionable, but I do think the laws will get tweaked. And so I think having some knowledge about what's happening and how it's what people's attitudes are toward it in the city as it gets implemented, I think will be instructive.
The only other question that I had was on page 4 with question 28 about what changes or improvements would be needed in a particular service to be rated excellent or good. And when we talk about like better development decisions, like what's better? More? Less? None? You know,
To go their
different
way.
kind. You know, yeah, and
I
so.
think it's more that I agree with.
So, yeah. So I that one, I don't know. I wish I could kind of drill down on that and figure out what better is.
Now, it is 21% of the N is 147. So they had to be in that group. So it's
28%.
Yeah.
28 people.
28 people in that group.
29.
So, yeah, that's yeah. And to your point, Councilor, it's going to be in the eye of the beholder on that one. Yeah.
And I think that happens. I mean, you look at when we have things come forward to the council, I mean, not that many people show up, but people do, but people, you know, when it's their neighborhood, they get cranked up. And so you ask a question like that, and if they didn't like something that happened nearby or whatever, you're going to get numbers about like the ones you got.
Yeah, I would go back though and key then on the chart about the ability to have input into zoning decisions and you being at 88%. That's overcoming, some cities have issues with residents not being able to differentiate having your say and having your way.
Right.
I like that. Yeah.
So your folks, you have almost 90% saying, I'm able to provide input. They're not holding the decision against you, like in other communities.
And I would say, I agree with that. In my experience, and I've been doing this for a while, people expect to be heard. They'd like to be agreed with, but if they feel they've been heard and not agreed with, they can handle that. They respect that. If they feel you haven't been listening and don't care, then you get in trouble.
Yes.
So I think that's the important thing. If people feel heard, even if they don't like the decision, they can live with it.
Yep.
9 times out of 10.
Sorry, just one more follow-up question, because I liked how you did the comparison with different communities. How do we compare in terms of our, like those priorities, those conservation priorities?
You've always been a sea of greens out here.
Okay, so that's a big concern compared to other communities,
Yes.
those conservation and.
Absolutely,
so
yes. You've
that-
always been a very environmentally focused
climate
community.
action. Okay.
I think it goes back to the values of the lake and nature and trees and all of those things. You've always, you know, going back historically.
Right.
You're the greenest city in Hennepin County.
Okay, great, good to know, thank you.
Anything else, everyone?
And Brett, I
Yeah.
know we need to move on. I just make one last comment on the most concern, the biggest concern is sidewalks. I had a conversation with Paula earlier about that, and I think that's,
Oh,
we were
yeah.
on the clock last year, again, I think Peter mentioned it was the #1 issue in last year's survey. And so you as a council, I think we spent 2 study sessions talking about our sidewalk and trails plan. We looked at our funding sources, and at this point, we decided to keep things as is. So we're not looking to increase the franchise fees, which ultimately pays for our trails
Right.
and sidewalks. The reason I mention that is again, it's it's our #1 issue. And I shared with staff earlier today that the meeting that I had with the Hopkins School District last week. Mayor, I hadn't shared this with you yet.
Right.
So last Friday, there was a meeting with the Hopkins School District. So quarterly, the school district calls a meeting, just like Minnetonka does, where it's the school district officials, and then they invite the mayors and city administrators or managers in from the cities that are served in that district boundary. So for Hopkins, it's Minnetonka, Hopkins, Golden Valley, and Eden Prairie.
Yep.
And one of the things that the school mentioned was with their budget shortfall, like all school districts are dealing with pretty significant budget shortfalls. Hopkins School District is dealing with a $7 million shortfall. One of the ways that they're addressing it is changing their busing policy. And so so they changed their policy that a student or a family that lives within 2 miles of one of their facilities will no longer receive busing. And so I think, as I shared again with staff, I shared with Paula earlier, I think that will put some more strain on our trail and sidewalk plan, as there might be neighborhoods turning to the city to look for further installation of sidewalks.
Interesting.
To
Yeah.
provide more
Safe routes to
safety,
school.
Safe routes to school. So I think we already are feeling some immense pressure on our trail plan, and in talking with, where's Will? Here's Will. I think the updated numbers on our park and trail plan was at 80 million in the current CIP. Now it's up to 100 million.
Wow.
So just cost estimates and inflation is pressures on our current plan, I think, let alone looking at potential pressures coming from some neighborhoods.
So we just double our levy next year, we solve it?
So I just share that with you as we look at sidewalks in our upcoming CIP.
Sorry, that just brought to mind kind of a question that I had for a future, like zoning or whatever, because I know that we have requirements for, commercial multifamilies for sidewalks, but it came to mind, it was something I thought about with Minnetonka Flats last week. Is there any thought of maybe including that for new home developments? I can understand reasons there might or might not be, but,
You can now. It's in the code that you can require them. I think there's a balancing act, as you've always probably, thought about, is how much maintenance and then what is the bang for the buck. Is there enough sidewalks in the vicinity of the development, especially a 3-lot subdivision or a 2-lot subdivision? Sometimes the installation doesn't make sense because it doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
So I think it's a balance. But you have the authority in the zoning code today. That's not holding you back.
I didn't know if it was an R1 thing that we could do. So.
No, it's absolutely there.
Okay. Anyway, just thinking of anything that we can do to help achieve those goals, and especially now. Wow.
Council, anything else? Mike, did you get the answers you need?
I did, yeah. Thank you, Council.
Okay.
Hopefully, I think I shared with all of you today that overall, I think it's really good results. A slight improvement from last year's survey, and you'll see this, as Sarissa mentioned, coming back to you for acceptance at the upcoming council meeting. And we do use this for our merit program, and so this gets graded out, and we'll share that with you as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Good. So, 2025 business survey.
If we can, Brad, we'll start with Julie.
Oh, Julie, excuse me.
Just a reminder of how we got here. It's not an every year thing that we're checking in with businesses. And so the last time we did a business survey was in 2021. As you remember, what was happening at that time, we were coming out of the pandemic. There was all kinds of, just turmoil in the business world and trying to figure out how people are going to get back on their feet. And so that was done with a different company. I would say if you ever want to refer back to it, it's all on our business page. You can find any of the studies or the reports that we're referring to. But I think that it just didn't have the methodology that Peter brings to the survey process. And I think that's what we were looking for, some more quality data that we could rely on and look for trends over years. So that's, first we didn't use Peter, we were trying to use a different firm to see what else we could find. We came back to Peter saying, we need a little bit more data point kind of survey. So that's why we have him here. And we worked on questions that reflected the previous survey, but not exactly on all fronts. So with that, Peter, I'll turn it to you.
Super. And to that point, it's not even on the common questions, you can't do an apples to apples comparison, simply because of methodology, and then also the timing. 2021 in the business world was obviously very chaotic. So we're planting our flag in the ground for the survey results on the business community. This sets the baseline. There are some, like I shared when I presented at the Economic Development Commission and the Chamber. Just out of curiosity, when you own your own survey company, you can do surveys. And so we did a metro-wide business survey, about 20 questions, just so I could set some norms. And I'll share some of those in the survey also. So the method,
We just always remind what the questions are before.
Okay.
So just take those in.
All right, got them right here.
And then go ahead.
Perfect. This survey was done prior to the residential survey, January 16th through February 12th. This was also 400 owners and chief decision makers, plus or minus 5%. Average interview time was 17 minutes. Non-response rate was 5.5%. On this one, about 80 some odd percent were done by appointment. Obviously, you just don't call up a business owner and I want to spend 20, 25, 30 minutes on the phone with you. So a lot of them were done by appointment. I think, unfortunately, it's important to put an asterisk by the date because we've had Liberation Day on April 2nd. What it's interesting, though, I will share what we're seeing in research with surveys coming off right now from school districts and cities since April 2nd is not a big increase in economic insecurity.
In what?
In economic insecurity. That's what this is. I'm going to do another two statewides in May, where I'll have a better view across the state. But I'm not seeing a spike. The only thing, I was talking to a couple other pollsters about this, and one of them suggested, and it's interesting, I need to think about it, what you see in the stock market yo-yoing is an unrealized loss. And so it might not have the impact that we saw in 23 and 24 because everybody was going to the grocery store. Everybody was filling up their tank with gas. They were feeling the economy day by day, week by week. So maybe we're not going to get the jump in economic insecurity. Maybe we will. Who knows where the market goes? So it's just interesting. This is a snapshot before a little more tumultuous time, shall we say. So we, for the purpose to just put up a couple demographics, pared this down also for council, and I think the first thing that jumps off with your business community is the stability of it. 43% have been in the city of Minnetonka for over 20 years. Only 21% have been here for 10 years or less. Now, part of this is stunted by the pandemic. You don't have the business growth that you had 20 years ago, or the turnover. So this probably is going to evolve if you do the survey again in 3, 4, 5 years. Also, with the demographics, 53% male, 46% female, 1% non-binary. I want to put this up just for the business, the building owner versus the tenant. Because it does impact a question later on about sustainability measures that the business has undertook. So just so you keep in mind, basically half of the folks own the business, the building they're in, 44% are tenants. So an overall assessment of
Peter, I'm sorry, the demographics, the type of businesses in terms of race was 18% non-white, I believe was the final number.
Yes.
I added it up.
You did? Okay.
18%.
18%?
Yep.
Okay. An overall rating of the business climate, 98% rate it favorable. In the metro area business survey I did this spring, the excellent rating was 22% across the metro. You're at 48% excellent, that enthusiastic rating. So folks, but I think it goes back to when I almost have a majority of businesses that have been around for 20 years, there's a stability in the business. And so the climate, overwhelmingly favorable. Is there something the city could do to improve the business climate? 74% say no. The highest is 7% saying lower taxes. In the metro area survey, it was about 25% of folks saying lower taxes. So it's not the concern in the business community. This is top of the mind. They can tell us anything. And what else? Tax incentives, more redevelopment. Just probably the right kind of redevelopment that they agree with.
That's true.
Are they optimistic about the future? Absolutely. 95% are either very or somewhat, but a flat majority, 58%, say they're very optimistic about the future of their business. Issues for the business. We went through and multiple issues and said, is this a very serious, somewhat serious, not too serious, or not at all serious issue? The two major issues are the macro. The cost of doing business, 74%, with 38% saying very serious, and then the general economic conditions, 82%. Has the greatest level, 32% very serious. The amount of city taxes is at top of the mind. What could you do to fix? What didn't come up. When you ask it specifically, 64%, and then everything else falls off. What's the most serious issue facing their business? This one I put up the metro area just so you can see some comparisons on the key issues. First off, inflation, cost of living, half of what we see in the metro survey, 16%. The cost of doing business, 10%. The workforce shortage at 7%. High taxes, 16%. 9% or 7%, 9% lower. And then, lack of customers, high rent, supply chain, lack of profits. You have a higher group of scattered because you had a lot of idiosyncratic responses based per business, whether you're lawn care or, all of those sorts of things. But the nothings, go back to your booster core in the community survey, it was 31%. 26% of businesses see no problem. That's 3 times the number in the metro area survey. So on all of these, it's more than half a concern that you see across the metro, and in the booster core, triple. Workforce, on the quality and the quantity, they don't have any concerns. Now, I would love to have the data point from 21 to do the comparison, because in 21, when we did business surveys, especially the quantity of workforce going back to 21 was a major issue. If it was, it's been resolved. 94% on quality, 94% on quantity. Sustainability related actions. Now this one, they could first tell us if they've undertaken it, and if they have not undertaken it, do they have a plan to do it or no plan to do it? Building energy audit, 42% have, there's nobody planning to do it. Now keep in mind, 51% of the businesses own the building. The rest are tenants. Okay, so that cuts the number. Waste reduction reuse, 34% had. Energy efficiency upgrades, 33% had. Organics collection, 16. Water efficiency, 15. EV charging stations, 1%, with 6% indicating that they had plans. And this is what so people, they've either done it or they don't have plans to do it. When you look at, though, it's basically everybody saying no plan, they're renters. They're tenants of the building. That's what's driving it up, with 44% of the sample being tenants. City government, on attitudes and responsiveness, 98%. On the quality of city services, 100%. 1% said only fair. It was 3. I had to round up to the 1%.
We'll let it go.
Have they had contact with the city during the past year? 23% indicated they had, 97% satisfaction. And like I said, when I presented it to the chamber, to the Economic Development Commission, this goes back to the input on zoning. There's no way that 97% of people that talked to you got the answer they wanted. Going back, they were at least heard. And so that the threshold on satisfaction on this one is 80%. The overall value of city services, it basically mirrors the residents in what they see. Even if there are concerns on taxes, the city services trump. 88% positive, only 3% were only fair, and 9% were unsure. Local sales tax. This one I had no idea what to expect, and 61% of businesses thought that it was a good idea. Now this was not tied to any sort of specific development. This was just in concept. So the devil would be in the details when you put out a proposal, a local sales tax, but first the legislature would have to get on board. But there's not, interestingly on this one, I expected more intensity also, you have very limited intensity on this question. On the business programs and services offered by the city, first off, we asked if they have heard or seen. So hearsay is built in. This isn't just all experience with the service. So what's showing is those that said they've heard or seen about the program or service, and then the rating of the service. So I think, looking at this, the opportunities for some of them are for growth, but then also refinement in moving people from only fair to good in some of these. If you're going to target something, the Thrive Minnetonka newsletter, expanding the amount of information in there, because you're going to see, I don't know if it's the next one, we'll talk about sources of information at the end. Areas for the city to focus on that would benefit their business. So they could say it should be a great focus, somewhat of a focus, little or no focus. There are 5 items that hit double digits, or a majority. Investing in redevelopment. Key is going to be in what the redevelopment is, but redevelopment, 64%. Retaining and growing existing businesses. So as a priority, it's just second at 33%, but add in some, it goes to 83%. Take care of what you have. Low interest loans, better training for workers, the recruiting for new business, 60%. So the priority is a focus on the existing. There's still a priority in, bringing in the next group of businesses, but make sure you take care of what's here. And then we drop into below majorities, building traffic infrastructure. Once again, is this going to be impacted when we go back to normal? Development of workforce housing, improving communication, collaborative workspace spaces, and sustainability efforts. Communication, how informed are they about city government? Your folks, I didn't put up the metro area, I should have. The metro area on this one is 59%. Your folks are highly informed. Part of it is longevity in the community. I mean, when you have that number of businesses in business for over 20 years, they have built-in communication networks. Whether they're not getting the city newsletter, council, or chamber, what have you, 77% indicate they're very or somewhat informed. And how are they getting? The Thrive newsletter, emails from the city, and the city website. The city dominates the communication network for local businesses. If you look at it for the preferred source, do they want print? Do they want electronic? Even the Minnetonka newsletter, keep in mind you had a large number of business owners and managers who are residents also. 10% talk about the Minnetonka newsletter. It basically divides 50-50 on print versus electronic as a preference. So, here, I'll just go right to the questions overall.
All right, well, thank you. So, any results, council, that surprised you from the business survey?
I was so fascinated by the level of support for sales tax. I just thought that was fascinating.
I found it interesting.
Yeah.
I can't help but wonder, and this would be, we ask no questions on it, but if a business has concerns, and we saw it when you bring up property taxes, business owners see it as a way to perhaps alleviate property taxes by the 54% from outside the community funding these projects. That would be a hypothesis. But this is, you're the first, I didn't put that in the Metro-wide survey, the local option sales tax, but I was equally surprised by that.
Other surprises? Anyone?
I didn't. Oh.
I was pleased to see that even though there wasn't a lot of sustainability actions where there was less than we would hope for because of the whole tenant issue, as you said, nonetheless there was interest. It was there as something that they thought the city should focus on.
Yes, it was still, you had almost a majority saying it's something to focus on.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things, it's just a level of priority for a business at this point in time, and then the differentiation on ownership versus rent.
But they
And-
seemed to think it was something we should,
Yes.
like to see us focus
Yeah.
on. So that was good too.
Yep.
I actually was surprised that 44% had done an audit. I didn't think it would
Yeah.
be that high. So that number surprised me. It was higher
Rebecca,
than
you
I
had a-
expected.
Yeah, I thought, I thought the 2021, I recall, I didn't go back and review it, but was a little lukewarm. I had been a little disappointed in the results then. And I feel much more positive about these results. It really was reassuring to know, because you have a gauge. You rarely hear from business owners as a council member, or not in the same frequency as you hear from residents. And so this was really helpful. And this format, it's nice to see the similar format to our resident survey.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to, I do have, this is about 20 years ago, but I do have a control group comparison of this. The city of Fridley did a business survey, and the council wanted the survey mailed to everybody, every business owner, because they wanted to say, we asked for your input, the random sample. But within, it was roughly 2,000 businesses back then. We randomly selected 400 that we had to hear from. And we had to club them over the head in order, we ended up doing it by phone at some point, because you only get about a 20% return rate, and then you have to, but when you ran the random sample against everybody who mailed in the survey, the random sample, the big was about 15 points more negative. Because what motivated you to respond is you had an issue.
Yeah.
And I think because that was a self-selected, the last one.
We mailed that one.
Yeah. And so you just tend to hear from people with, and that's the problem with self-selection. You also have it sometimes, I've run into it a lot with school districts, where groups try to win surveys.
Right.
Like if we're asking about, do you support a hockey arena for the school district? If you run that survey, every hockey association parent's going to fill out the survey, and all of a sudden 90% of people support $100 a year and it's, so, it's kind of that methodology problem. So it just tends to be really negative, or groups try to win a survey.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your making that distinction, because, I think, I can't tell you, over the years, we would talk about this telephone survey, and there were a handful of residents, one in particular, I won't name her name, who just said, well, you're so out of it. I mean, telephone surveys are so passé, and I tried, you should be doing this online, because that's the way the world is now and everything. I said, no, you don't, and I think we talked about it a bit. You don't understand that when an audience self-selects, it's much more biased. I mean, you kind of elbow your way in by doing it on the phone, and I think that's good, because it's much more random, and I think that's really positive. And then to the point that Rebecca made, I mean, I think I give our community development team, because I think the Thrive newsletter and the awareness that has grown with some of the activity with the programs, the overt programs that we've had, I think that's done a lot for the city's image in the minds of businesses, because they're aware of those things. And we're doing a lot more things now than we were 5 or 10 years ago.
Yep. And they're going to be aware of it, because so many were around 10 years ago. So they knew what it was, and they can see the addition.
One takeaway, I had a mayor's meeting today, and Tim Bussey was there, and he was talking about the Bloomington Hatch program. Are you familiar with that? And I think there are some innovative ideas that are being done in some cities, so further conversation on that is coming. Anything else, council?
Not for number one, but
Kizzy had something.
Okay,
Kizzy has something.
I don't have anything for number one, but I do, as we kind of go through the questions, I do have something.
Okay, well, is it number 2? If it
Well,
is, go for it.
I'll just talk about it. I know that I heard Julie say that there's 18% non-white. She added it up, because that was my question I talked to Mike about earlier today. But I wanted to know, do you have the gender of the demographics and the ethnicity of the demographics? So I would like to know that. And then one of the things that I had questions about with programming and suggestions around the last question, basically the programming and policy. I would like to know about the businesses. Do any of these businesses partner with the schools? Because this goes back to us not having, I'm feeling like there's not, I know we're doing programming for youth. We have an ACE program, and I know I talked to Mike about this earlier, but I really want to see if there's a way where we can really partner with some of the businesses in our city to make sure that we're supporting youth, especially as we continue to increase and diversify our city. Because I feel like from what Mike was talking to me about, I know I'll have a conversation with Miranda later, but just making sure that we're using all the resources in our city to make sure we're helping kids along the way with employment and with some of the comments around workforce, making sure better training and all those things. To me, all of that kind of ties together. So just making sure that we can continue to support youth. So I would like to see that maybe on a study session so that we can talk about it deeper. And I know we're going to be talking about it for programming and youth and all of that, but I think that would be important that we discuss that.
All right, thank you, Kizzy. Yep, go ahead.
I was going to say, it was interesting on, and the demographics are all, they're laid out in the survey. So but when you talk about, because we followed up what sort of skills are missing and competencies for the workforce, the chart's not up there, but it really is not technical skills, it's life skills the business owners are seeing. It's organization, teamwork, time management, those sorts of things is what people, the business owners or managers were saying, or something to target. So,
Well, that's perfect for youth, right?
100%, yes.
Other questions, Deb?
So just on number 2, one of the things that struck me is who answered the survey. So it was the people in charge of the company, so it was the executives. So their answers on things like transit and transportation, housing and childcare were overwhelmingly positive, and my thought process was, I wonder what their employees think.
100%.
Like, I wonder, and so I think it might be too much for us to crack that nut, but I would be so interested to know the difference between the executive perception and the employee perception. So that was one thing that really struck me. And I would say that another thing, something that struck me for the last question has to do with a comment that you heard at the Economic Development Advisory Commission from, or you might have been gone already. One of the commissioners is in the nonprofit world, and the nonprofit world is cratering, but they provide extremely important services to our residents. And there really aren't other entities in government that provide some of those services. And so viewing them as businesses and maybe having a more aggressive, because we do so well in general, getting the word out about things like Thrive and even like the emergency funding and some of the programs that we have, making sure that our nonprofits know that they're available to them as well, and maybe including nonprofits as businesses, or finding a way to incorporate specifically nonprofits in Minnetonka, not just for-profit businesses, because I think that they're going to have an exceptionally challenging next few years, and we really need to support them and partner with them. And I agree with Kizzy just in terms of looking at the challenges that our residents are going to be facing with the drying up of federal dollars and social safety net programs. How can we partner with these businesses and nonprofits to kind of plug some of the holes that we're all concerned about developing in the next coming months and years?
Mayor, if
Julie.
I may. On the randomized survey, you do not exclude nonprofits. from that.
Nonprofit, oh, yeah, thank you. We excluded religious organizations. So
religious,
churches were taken out.
Yeah.
Nonprofits were included.
Okay. So
Do you
they could come up in the survey, so that it's not
Yeah.
an automatic, you're out if you're nonprofit. So
Right.
that, I just want to make sure that
Yep.
was clear.
Yep.
The second thing is, because of that comment at EDAC, we are doing some follow-up, just some interviewing with nonprofits the city works with or in the community.
Mhm.
Not all nonprofits in Minnetonka.
Yeah.
We're doing the ones that impact city stuff. And
Right.
so we'll bring that back in, Mike and I talked about during the EIP discussion, we can talk about that, because that's where we talk about programs and different things like that, so we can do
I
that
do
then.
think that nonprofits and for-profit businesses sort of face different challenges, and I'm wondering, you know, if there might be questions we could ask and maybe differentiate a little bit, sort of how nonprofits are experiencing things here in Minnetonka and how for-profit businesses are experiencing. I just think there's a difference. It's sort of like having ERPs that serve business that really don't fit government. It's the same kind of thing, that it's just a slightly different operation. But I'm not exactly sure what the difference would be, but those are the thoughts that occurred to me. And I'm done talking.
Other thoughts, Patsy?
And what I noticed is most of the people, their workforce aren't working from home.
Right.
Yeah.
And so their work, I'd like to know how they're getting here, and obviously cars. But like, if we, you know, had mass transit out here, would they use that more? Would that be something that would attract more people, or, you know, something about making it cheaper and easier and less, you know, carbon footprinty kind of thing?
Was it 67% said they just wanted to use their car.
This is,
But
yeah, this is.
But also with the whole partnering with, you know, nonprofits and young people, and, you know, the future is not car. I mean, I know it is, but you know, how can we figure that out? That just to make it, because Minnetonka is far away from the city.
We did ask folks, were they aware of Southwest Light Rail? 69% said they were. That's scheduled to start open, you know, in 2027.
Right.
Kept pushing that number out. Do you think Southwest Light Rail will be an asset to your business? 41% said yes, 38% said no, and 22% had no idea. Now, part of it is geographic. If I'm in Ridgedale, Southwest Light Rail is not going to matter
Right.
to me. The point goes back to Calvert's on, these are employers. Employees might have a very different answer, especially when we're talking transportation, childcare, housing.
Right.
They're only going to raise it if they hear it from their employees as an issue.
Right, I agree with that, and I think, you know, doing some deeper diving on that, you know, in terms of trying to get, you know, and it depends. I mean, if your small business is 3 people, you're pretty closely connected to those employees. If you know, if you're the CEO of a company that employs 300 people, you may not have may not have as good a sense, you know, of firsthand knowledge. But the other thing is that I think for a lot of this stuff, you know, the business community was very supportive of Southwest Light Rail, and, you know, in its concept stages and so forth. Clearly, you know, the delays have not helped things. The challenges that mass transit in the metro area is facing has not been helpful. You know, and the press has not been helpful. But you know, I think that's coming around. But one of the things, Metro Transit's doing a microtransit trial that involves Minnetonka. And for us, when you think about Ridgedale and all the people that go there, you know, if we have a solution to that last mile or two, and can get people from some of our you know, mass transit options, you know, to Ridgedale, the impact may be pretty significant. And I do recall a long time ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that was a book review about the New York subway system that was built 100 years ago, and the dividing lines in New York were very similar to what you had here. That people who were close to the line favored it, and people who were away from it, weren't very interested. But the post-analysis was that it was a rising tide that raised all the boats. It drove economic development in New York for the region, not just for the places on the line. And I think that's something it's going to take a long time for us to draw that conclusion. But I really do think that having an effective transit system lifts everybody up.
I read the book. Yeah, it was probably.
Did I paraphrase?
Yeah, very well. I mean, yeah, it was a fascinating read, and basically, it's going to take 75, 100 years.
Yeah.
In order for an evaluation. I mean, we probably, because where people live now is based on transit, work, and everything, and you can't retrofit it in. It's one of those things, you build it and expand on it like New York. Yeah, it was a fascinating read. But a true evaluation, you're not going to know until people start changing their behaviors, where they build, where they live, where they work, and everything.
But I think that microtransit and that last mile question is really, really critical for a city like Minnetonka. I mean, we only have one station. We have 1.5 stations. I mean, we share one with
Hop gets the half. That's a half.
Eden Prairie has 4. And so light rail I think is important for Minnetonka, but I think we're going to have to extend that. Any other, let's see, did we get to everything? Anything else that you want to comment on question 2 or program suggestions?
The only thing I heard on the EIP is just kind of following up on the nonprofits. The youth is not totally within the EIP, so I'm not sure where that all fits in, but so those are the 2 things I heard, at least that need follow-up.
Yeah. Anything else?
Just the sustainability piece, if there's anything that we can do.
Well, I think on that, this is informative to the commission's work, and I believe that they would take that information as they develop their next year's plan in terms of their outreach. They are so focused on residents right now, which is great. They're getting a lot of impact that way, but I think we need to remind them on the business side that people are kind of looking for data and information and programs for sustainability. So I think that's at least a lesson here about what is out there for businesses.
And so that's all going through the Sustainability Commission in terms of outreach to businesses or programs?
We just got the data, so we
yeah,
haven't
no,
been
I'm
there
just
yet.
trying who that goes through.
Yeah,
So, okay.
absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
we use it pretty much everywhere. I mean, we're always looking at this data to develop our plans. Yep.
I guess I got one more comment. I guess, I don't know where this falls at, but one of the things is, how do we support more businesses of color? So that's one of the things I want to talk about. And I don't know if that's part of a study session too, but how do we try to increase that number? Because it is still a low number when I look at the numbers.
18% is low too? Okay. Statewide, 12% of businesses are owned by BIPOC, people of color. So we're higher than the state average in terms of who is surveyed. I think what I hear you saying though, maybe dive in a little bit more on the services.
Just to, I'm just curious how we can support them and just continue to grow, in our city, so.
Well, and I think too, benchmarking it versus, I mean, you look at our demographics from a population perspective, and then our development in terms of our BIPOC ownership of businesses, and I mean, it sounds like, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
So I think, to me, that's a success, but I think understanding what benchmarks we should be looking at, so that we're not overdeveloped, but we're not really underdeveloped given our population. I think that's important data for us to consider as we look at those, as the metrics on those. We're not going to be the same as you know, the city of Minneapolis.
I think
That's
you were gonna
right.
say Minneapolis.
Well,
because
but I
you
mean,
was
but
always
you
saying
look,
Minneapolis.
but I mean,
But
you
the
look at
demographics
the,
are
you look at the
different.
numbers there too, but I mean, you know, how
Yeah.
does Minneapolis do, you know, in terms of the proportion of its population
That's a good
versus the
question.
number of BIPOC-owned businesses in Minneapolis? And then, okay, now let's compare Minnetonka on the same measure. You might find that relative to Minneapolis, we're overdeveloped on BIPOC businesses. I'm not saying we should be satisfied with that, but again, let's have that context so we know what we're looking at.
Peter, do we know
If I
that?
may-
On Minneapolis, I'd have to look at the data on that.
I'd be kind of curious as
Yeah,
a percentage of
I
population
did include
versus
Minneapolis and St. Paul in the metro survey
Okay.
that I did.
Right.
Because I don't include them when I do it for the norms for the suburbs either, because
Sure.
it just
It's
brings
different.
things, it's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
When you
Just be-
compare, can you compare it to other cities then? Or like eating per comparison?
I could look at the metro, because I did ask ethnicity on that 400 sample that I did this spring. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember what it was in the 7-county metro, excluding Minneapolis and St. Paul, but I can follow up.
And Kizzy, for the EIP, we'll bring you back the demographics on open to business and for Elevate. We'll give you the who's using those programs and who's being helped.
Okay.
All right. Anything else now? Because if we end now, we will be ending on time.
Right on
When's the
time.
last time we did that? So, but if, I don't want to cut anybody off, if there's,
It's just May study session.
yeah, study session is the last item. And we've got, let's see, on my last page here. Mike, I'll just turn it over to you, but our May study session topics?
Yeah, thank you, Brad and Council. So, yeah, May 12th is our next study session. We have 2 items on the agenda. I alluded to one of those earlier, that Kelly will be back and do a refresh on the facilities. And then it'll be a lot of the Darren and Mike budget kickoff presentation as we launch into our 2026
All right.
budget. And so it's all about budget. So it's capital improvements and budgets, I'm sorry, not capital, rec capital and budgets. And then in June, that's when we turn our attention to June 16th is the CIP, and then as Julie just alluded to, the EIP that evening, so more budget conversation. And then in June, we'll have a 30-minute open time, so that'll be in June. And then one more month out in July, we'll have it's usually our all-housing study session, so Julie will have a housing update, and then to some of Kizzy's questions here this evening, youth programming and opportunities. So Kelly will be part of that conversation as
Great.
well. So that's coming up on the
Thanks, Mike.
docket, and as you know, Council, this is your study session time, so as always, if there's any changes, you want to move something up or down off the list, you just have to direct that to staff. But
All
that's
right,
what we're
thanks.
planning for.
Anything else, anyone? I want to thank staff for sitting through all this. I mean, we had to, so you had to, but it was good. It was good to have you all here, so thank you, and we'll call it a night.